District 13,
Present.
District 14, District 15.
Here. Thank you very much. I don't think we have a quorum, but there we go. We do have some folks online. Commissioner Popkin is online. Commissioner Carpenter.
I believe the room
So-
is just unmuted. I wasn't hearing anything until just now.
We can hear you. Can you hear us, Commissioner Popkin?
Finally, yes.
Perfect.
I just heard a call for 14.
Okay, so you're present. Commissioner Carpenter
Yes.
is present. Good morning. Welcome to the Dallas City Plan Commission. Today is Thursday, July 21st, 2022, 10:15 a.m. This is a briefing for the Dallas City Plan Commission, a time for commissioners to ask questions of staff. We are looking forward to take that public input, and that will happen at the hearing today. Commissioners, just a heads up on the process today. The briefing of the West Oak Cliff Air Plan for the morning session will happen probably near the end. We have a couple of staff members out of pocket for the moment. They should be checking in with us here in the next hour or so. So we'll go back to that. Also, the West Oak Cliff Air Plan, I believe, will only be brief today. Of course, we're happy to take public input at the hearing, but I suspect that I expect that will be voted on sometime in August. And with that, we're going to get right into the one miscellaneous item. And Ms. Seaton, good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Can y'all see the presentation yet?
No, ma'am. Can you? He's using the public one. Lamb.
If he walks on his bed,
He did.
Jason should walk not to.
Okay.
We're gonna send him. Okay,
Are you
we're
ready?
ready. Yes, thank you.
Okay, this is M212036. This is an application for a minor amendment for a landscape plan for specific use permit 1596 for a general merchandise food store, 100,000 square feet or more in a property zone, commercial, community retail. It's 8.857 acres. It's on the northeast corner of Marsh Lane and Northwest Highway. And it's in District 12, or District 2, sorry.
It's D2.
Yes, it's D2, sorry. Okay, I'm not sure what's going on. Okay, there's a time delay, so sorry about that. This is to amend the existing landscape plan. On July the 7th, the development plan was amended, and the ordinance requires that the landscape plan also be approved by the committee. And in order to accommodate the reconfiguration of the parking lot changes for the additional retail drive-up parking stalls, 2 trees will need to be removed. So they are going to mitigate the trees and replant them in another location. This is not a change in the zoning request or a change in the zoning standards. This is located east of our downtown district or downtown area. This is the site aerial map. This is a zoning map. And this is the proposed site plan as approved by CPC. And this is the proposed detailed landscape. As you can see on the left, there are the 2 trees that will be part of the drive-up stalls, and then the 2 green circles will be where they're replanting those trees. The existing landscape plan. And staff is recommending approval.
Thank you, Ms. Seaton. Questions, Commissioner Young?
Yes, it's rather hard to see the detail of the amended landscape plan, but does the removal of the 2 trees still leave them in compliance with the rule that every parking space must be within a certain distance of a tree?
Yes, this was reviewed by BI, and then they will also be having canopies. So that will also, because they have the covering.
Well, I'm not sure I understand the canopy part of it.
Well, it's providing shade. So the trees, yes, are going to be mitigated. So
No,
that's the
that wasn't
standard.
my question. There's a provision in Article 10 that requires that every parking space be within a certain distance of a tree, and I don't think it allows canopies as an alternative.
Okay.
But this is in compliance with that provision?
According to, yeah, yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hampton?
Thank you, Chair Shadid. Ms. Seaton, thank you. I think you mentioned this in your presentation, but just to confirm, we reviewed the site plan at last CPC meeting. This is back before us because the SUP conditions require compliance with the landscape plan as well. So this is essentially bringing those 2 together in terms of the work that is proposed.
Correct.
And then were there any other conditions within the SUP that are a consideration for this body that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so it covered hours of operations and truck deliveries, those types of items
Yes.
related to the use of the retail store.
Yes.
Thank you. And if you could ask Mr. Irwin to confirm before our hearing at 1 o'clock that the plan is compliant with the components of Article 10, that would be appreciated.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Seaton. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Seaton. Commissioners, let's move on to our consent agenda zoning cases. Numbers 1, 2, and 4 have been taken off the consent, so we'll take each case individually, beginning with case number 1, which I believe is going to be held under advisement to August 4th. Yes, and but I think there are some commissioners that would like to have it brief, so we'll have it brief. Good morning, Mr. Mulkey.
Good morning, Commissioners. First case I have for you today is Z212-124. The request is for an application for an amendment to Plan Development District number 49. It's located at the northwest corner of East Camp Wisdom Road and University Hills Boulevard, and it's approximately 91. It's very far away from my head. The new council chambers are going to have adjustable desks, so I'm really excited about that. The request is an application for an amendment to Plan Development District number 49. It's located at the northwest corner of East Camp Wisdom Road and University Hills Boulevard, and it's approximately 91.42 acres. Here we see the location map showing the property within city limits. An aerial map with the area of request outlined in blue. and a zoning map with surrounding zoning districts and land uses. On Tract 4 currently is a funeral home. North of the area of request is a cemetery. East of the property are single-family and church uses. To the west is undeveloped property, and then to the south is a private recreation center, single-family, and childcare facility uses. The area of request is currently zoned PD number 49. The property is undeveloped with the exception of Tract 4, which is developed with a mortuary or funeral home. PD number 49 is subject to Chapter 51 rather than Chapter 51A, and it's divided into 4 tracts. Tract 1 is currently subject to the development standards of the SC district. This is an older zoning district from Chapter 51. Tract 2 is primarily subject to the O1 office district, Tract 3 to the MF2 multiple family district, and Tract 4 pretty much just allows a mortuary or funeral home use. With this request, the applicant intends to develop tracts 1, 2, and 3 with retail, lodging, and residential uses. To accomplish this, the applicant proposes the following changes: a textual amendment to the existing conditions of PD number 49, an update to the existing conceptual plan, currently Exhibit 49A, to reflect the proposed textual amendment, and the addition of a street section as Exhibit 49D that would provide enhanced standards for public streets within Tract 3. They are also proposing modified development standards primarily related to permitted uses, setbacks, lot width and depth, lot coverage, density, height, residential proximity slope, signs, and parking. The development plan and landscape plan for tracts 1, 2, and 3 would be required prior to construction. Those would be submitted to the City Plan Commission independently of this zoning change request. The current regulations of PD 49 have that as a requirement, and the applicant is proposing to retain that with this amendment. So some site photos. This is on East Camp Wisdom Road looking north at that front edge of the property. And here we are on University Hills Boulevard looking west. This is also on University Hills Boulevard looking west of the existing funeral home. And surrounding uses, this is a view of one of the residential streets to the south of the property. And this is a view of the childcare facility use to the south. This is a view southeast, kind of catty corner across the intersection to the UNT Dallas campus. You can see the signage there. This is a view of the single family neighborhood to the east of the property on Carioca Drive. And then this is the church east of the property on University Hills Boulevard. And more views of that church. And this is another view of the single family east of the site. And the cemetery to the north. This is the existing conceptual plan that's part of PD 49 today. As you can see, Tract 1 is subject to the shopping center district, and Tract 2 is subject to the O1 office district. There's also future right-of-way shown for a future Millet Drive that has yet to be constructed. This is the proposed conceptual plan. You can see they're retaining the shopping center district standards for Tract 1 and then also applying those same standards to Tract 2. So they're replacing the O1 office district standards, also removing that future right-of-way for Millet Drive from the conceptual plan. And this is the street section they're proposing to add as Exhibit 49D. Again, this would provide standards above and beyond what public streets would be required to provide within this PD. And with that, staff's recommendation is approval, subject to a revised conceptual plan, a street section, and revised conditions. And I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions, commissioners? Commissioner Young.
Yes, first a technical question, and that relates to the provision on electric vehicle parking. The way it is written, it would apply throughout the entire PD, and yet the area of request is only tracts 1, 2, and 3. So my question is, does section 118 need to be limited to tracts 1, 2, and 3 so that we're not zoning property outside the area of request?
Yeah, that would be my understanding.
Okay. My next question is to make sure I understand the height interaction between tracks 1 and 2 and the single-family property across University Hills to the east, and to a lesser degree, the single-family property to the southwest across Camp Wisdom, catty-cornered from, I guess that's track 2. As I understand it, right now, tracks 1 and 2 are limited to 2 stories. And the proposal is to repeal that limitation and also to repeal the Chapter 51 proximity slope that currently applies to the property.
The first of those 2 points is correct. They are proposing to only apply the 2-story limitation to track 4, so they would be removing it from tracks 1 through 3. However, because this PD is subject to Chapter 51 rather than 51A, residential proximity slope does not apply to the PD today. They're proposing to retain that moving forward.
Why doesn't the Chapter 51 proximity slope apply in this PD?
To the best of my knowledge, RPS wasn't adopted until the Chapter 51A update in 1987.
There is a Chapter 51 proximity slope. It's a little confusing because it's found in the setback regulations instead of the height regulations. But if you look at the setback regulations in Chapter 51 for the base zoning districts, you will find a proximity slope is different from the 51A. It's a 2-to-1 slope, and it applies from the commercial property line instead of from the residential property line. And it only applies when the residential is, I think it says contiguous or perpendicularly across a right-of-way from the commercial. But anyway, there is a 51 proximity slope. And so either way, we're going from a 2-story limitation to a 240-foot limitation. So as long as they set back 10 feet off of University Hills, they could go up 240 feet. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, and does that give you any concern for height intrusion on the single-family neighborhoods?
It doesn't. The area plan for this area near the UNC Dallas campus supports the applicant's request as well as staff's recommendation. It's really envisioned as a denser, walkable, mixed-use area adjacent to the campus. So staff felt that what the applicant is requesting is supported by that area plan.
And so if that intrudes on the quality of life of the single-family neighborhood, then so be it.
I mean, that's a really subjective statement. It depends on, what you choose to look at. Do you choose to look at and prioritize the single family that exists today, or do you choose to prioritize a denser, more urban style of development that's envisioned for the area moving forward?
Okay, I won't press that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Stannard.
Thank you, Mr. Mulkey. I just have a quick question because I don't really understand this. What does SC, I understand that's an old designation, shopping center, and Lordy B, we aren't going to develop those today. But anyway, what does shopping center as far as the code equate to today? How does that transition?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of codes, when they are updated, there's a district comparison table that's adopted with them that says, if you were zoned this with the previous code, that translates to this nowadays. Unfortunately, Dallas does not have one of those in our code, so there's not a direct correlation. But I would say it's probably similar to a CR community retail district or an RR regional retail district. It also does allow for residential because our previous code, Chapter 51, was cumulative. So a use that's permitted, how do I explain this? A use that's permitted in a heavier commercial district like CRRR also allows any of the less intense uses that are allowed in the less intense districts like single family or multifamily.
I see what you're saying. And so you're saying in that sense, shopping center would be the same, that it would allow for a less dense use of multifamily.
Correct.
So I guess as a follow-up to that, how did you arrive then, just based on what 51, chapter 51 allows? How did you arrive at the 240 feet and all the development standards for track 1 and track 2?
Sure. So the only other limitation on height in tract 1 and tract 2 right now is the 2-story limitation. That's not something that is stipulated within chapter 51. That's stipulated specifically in this PD. If that stipulation were removed, which is what the applicant's proposing to do, max height would default to the max height allowed in the base shopping center district, which is 240 feet.
Okay. I guess I don't know how to ask this question, but I am going to put it into a question. How did you get a conceptual sense of what they're intending to build there? Because when I read this, I get confused. Are they building retail? Are they building mixed use? Are they just trying to get height and zoning changes? I mean, I didn't come out with a sense of what was going on here, but we had other details that said they can do all these things.
Sure.
So how do I put that in a question? How were you able to get a sense of the parameters
Right.
of what this applicant was asking for?
Yeah, so this kind of case isn't typical of what usually comes before the commission, at least in the time I've been with the city of Dallas. This is more of a pure zoning type request. Most of the requests that come before you, especially involving PDs, we're doing a zoning case and we're also basically doing a full site plan review by committee because applicants know that the commissioners and council like to see like pretty much exactly what's going to be built on the site with the zoning request. I say this is more of a pure zoning request because it's, like I said, just 3 things. It's a textual amendment to the conditions. They're really just updating a little bit the existing conceptual plan to align with that textual amendment, and then they're adding a street section as well. So we're really saying in the realm of updating conditions and the conceptual plan. From what I understand, from what the applicant has told me, they're not entirely sure of how they intend to develop the property at this point. They don't have something as specific as a development plan at this point. But this textual amendment would allow them the flexibility to develop a mix of residential and non-residential uses without locking them down too much at this early stage. And that was one of the reasons staff is recommending approval, is because we felt the proposal does lock down enough to where we're comfortable while still giving them the flexibility to develop in the way they see fit.
Okay, and just one last question, and again, I'm trying to formulate this, but when you say conceptual plan, and I looked at both 49A and 49B in this, I don't see a concept. What I see is 4 tracks. So it's hard for me to equate that to what a quote conceptual plan is, because I can't get a concept from that.
Yeah, I'm guessing what you're expecting to see or would like to see is more of what we would call a development plan that shows specifically what will be developed on the property. The requirements for a conceptual plan are a lot less than a development plan. They're essentially required to show the different tracks within the PD and the intended uses for those tracks, as well as surrounding streets and access points and any kind of right-of-way they plan to, build through the property. That's actually in cities that aren't Dallas, a pretty typical way of going about the development process. Developers will frequently come in with a conceptual plan first that just kind of gives the general outline of the property. And then they will come back later, just as this PD requires, with development plans for individual tracks. So it gives them that flexibility and then allows them to build out the property over time. What typically I see at Dallas is, the desire is to have everything set in stone, right from the zoning case, which usually zoning is the first step along the development pipeline. It's not the penultimate.
Right. And I thank you, and I think I understand that, but I guess I have a little bit of an issue with there was a whole lot of lead up and build up to the University of Texas plan and thinking and this being supportive housing. And what I don't want to see doing as the city plan commissioner is suddenly just giving carte blanche that 91 acres could just be turned into a bunch of block high-rise apartments with no community, no retail, et cetera. And that is a possibility given this. So I
Right.
guess that is my concern. I don't mind giving the zoning, but don't want to end up not seeing it supporting what it is purported to do.
Sure, and one of the conditions that was volunteered by the applicant that, again, made staff feel comfortable recommending approval on this is for tracks 1 and 2, where the commercial development would be, they're adding a stipulation that residential uses are only permitted if they're on the second floor or above. So if they do have higher-rise multifamily or some flavor of residential, they would at least need to have ground floor retail that would provide a mixed-use development that would be more walkable on those commercial tracks. And then on tract 3, like I said, 51 is cumulative. So a multifamily district would also allow single family, which includes townhomes, and it also allowed duplex. So again, they're allowing for what they feel they need to allow for, potentially with a mix of different residential products on tract 3. But still locking things down enough to where staff feels comfortable. For example, they're capping the total number of dwelling units regardless of the residential type on track 3 at 950, which if the whole thing were developed as multifamily today, I think I run like a rough calculation, it could go up to like a little over 1,000 dwelling units if it was all just multifamily. But they would be capping that at 950 units for the whole tract.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Houseright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I've answered my own question with a little more reading. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions, commissioners? Commissioner Blair, please.
I have a question or two. One of the questions that Commissioner Stannard asked was about not having this have high rises, but with the density, does not density give way to more height development than straight, flat, sprawling development?
Yeah, that's the thing. It potentially, but also potentially they could develop the entire tract 3 with single family. Like I said, they don't really know what exactly the development will be right now. So they do want to propose conditions that allow for some flexibility while still locking down some things.
Can I follow up, Commissioner Chair? So, and going towards height, this is more of an urban appearing development opposed to something that is more linear and flat, correct?
That would be the intent, yeah. And to Commissioner Stannard's point about having a bit of trouble visualizing what's proposed for that, that's why in my case report I did detail very specifically the development standards for tracks 1, 2, and 3, just so it's very clear what they would be limited to. For example, in the table for tract 3, the current height is 36 feet with the 2-story height limitation, but they're proposing a max height of 54 feet for that tract.
So basically that would be like 3 stories.
3 or possibly 4, yeah.
Okay, and then, but or if you're aware, over by Lancaster and Crouch, where we have a development that's going in, that too is also 3 stories. That is on the DART line, and it gives way to more urbanism and urbanism design. So this would be consistent with that development that has already come through CPC approved and approved by City Council, is in the process of being built now, correct?
That's correct.
Not only, okay, so in going along with that vein of more flexibility for height, would this also, with the concept of this design with retail on the first floor and or office or whatever on the first floor and residential on additional floors, would that not be along the same design standards that we see downtown in the Cedars and areas of that nature?
It would be indicative of a denser mixed-use product, yes.
So the city of Dallas already has that type of development. That is nothing new for the city of Dallas, correct?
Correct.
The only thing that would be considered would be something that is new in the southern area of Dallas, correct?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes, Mr. Mulkey, my question is about the disconnect between the site plan that's with the zoning case and the site plan, the conceptual plan, I mean, that is included in the TIA. Because the conceptual plan in the TIA gives a great deal more specificity, but it's not really binding. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So the traffic impact study would not be adopted as an exhibit if the PD amendment were approved by council, but it is reviewed as part of staff review.
Did it concern you at all that, there were very specific recommendations in the TIA about ingress and egress, but that information isn't included on the conceptual plan before us?
Correct. Yeah, that information would be reviewed by engineering.
Okay. 1 second here. Before I phrase this as a question, let me just say I'm kind of troubled. I understand the argument for flexibility, but to put this in a question, I'll just say, are you bothered by the fact that there's no language in the PD for sidewalks around the perimeter, planting strips, nothing about pedestrian lighting or pedestrian amenities, standards for open space, amount, location, amenities, paved versus unpaved, urban form setback, any cap on the number of residential units in tract 1 and 2. There is a cap in density for tract 3, but not 1 and 2. There's no design standards for structures such as transparency or units connecting to the sidewalks. It doesn't specify how far porches are allowed to encroach into the 10-foot front yard. There are no building separations required for single or multifamily. There's no rear yard setback for single family, no side yard setback for any use in all 3 tracts. The minimum single family lot width of 16 feet. We touched a little bit on the impact of no residential proximity slope. I'll skip that over. Some questionable uses allowed in that SC, such as liquor stores and pawn shops, indoor commercial amusement, anything about any attempt to preserve some of the treed area. Those are all fairly significant omissions in my book, and I'm just concerned, or do you have any concern that a development plan based on this fairly loose conceptual plan could omit all of those details?
I'll speak to that last question first, and then I noticed 5 points in your questions, and I'm going to try and remember them all. To the question about the development plan, a development plan would not necessarily address some of the concerns you mentioned. It could, but those concerns could also be addressed by more specific conditions within the PD. So that's the first thing, or I'm sorry, that's before the first thing, but the first thing is a lot of what you mentioned would fall under the heading of design standards. Staff did consider negotiating some design standards with the applicant. However, there is a little bit of difficulty to do that at this stage because, again, this request is more conceptual than what the commission is used to seeing. So we didn't feel that would be helpful, although we certainly wouldn't have any objection to the commission adding additional design standards. Permitted uses allowed in the shopping center district. Staff would have no objection to the uses you mentioned, although of course the commission could recommend to prohibit those uses on those tracks. Got the first 2.
How about the single family, no setbacks?
I think in debate, what you did is called the spread, by the way.
Well, I know this is being put under advisement, but I wanted to ask the question globally.
Yeah, yard lot space. Yeah, so you mentioned concerns about the yard lot space. Staff does not have any objection to the yard lot space conditions proposed by the applicant. We feel that would lead to, again, the denser style of development that the applicant intends here. dwelling unit density maximum on tract 1 and tract 3. We felt that restricting residential uses to the second floor or above was adequate enough to address residential density on tract 1 and 2. And yeah, and there was one more, and I can't remember it.
That's okay. Lack of design standards. Well, okay, let me ask another question. Without specifying a density cap in tracks 1 and 2, would that mean that the underlying Chapter 51 limit on density would be the 15 units per acre for multifamily?
Correct. Yes. Thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah. So they would be limited on tracks 1 and tract 2 to 15 dwelling units per acre.
Okay. And about the perimeter sidewalks and planting strips?
Right. That could also be addressed with design standards. However, there would be base engineering requirements triggered along those public rights of way. And Mr. Navarez could speak to that in more detail.
Okay, so some of the staff basically wouldn't have any objection to adding more detail to the PD if the applicant comes forward with those.
Correct. Yeah, we would not object to additional design standards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Any other questions, Commissioner Stannard?
I'm sorry, I have a follow-up from Commissioner Carpenter on this. Because I've seen this before, and again, I'm going to think how to phrase this as a question, which is, have you found that sometimes that if it's not in the PD and then later a development plan is submitted, all of a sudden they say, oh, well, we didn't have to do that because all we had to do is follow the PD.
That is absolutely 100% correct. And that's why staff always makes an effort, any kind of conditions that are shown on the development plan but not codified in the PD conditions, we make sure that those are codified because, as I'm sure you're all aware, amendment to the conditions of a PD goes through the full zoning process. Again, there's a lot more discretion there, whereas an amendment to a development plan, there's not as much discretion. It would just need to meet code requirements.
Right. And so I'm starting to feel, and I can hear you saying that sometimes perhaps, here's my question, that more in the PD might be better than less.
Yeah,
than being too general.
So a development plan does lock down applicants to a certain set of standards, and it does offer some comfortability to elected and appointed officials. However, what is in the PD conditions themselves are much more set in stone and much more enforceable.
Okay, and one other question about when you submit the development plans. I just want to be very clear, because I think, like my other commissioners, sometimes when you're talking about developing 91 acres, these large tracts, you want a sense of what the community is going to be and how it's going to interact, not just submitting after the fact, building by building and rubber stamping the development plan. So given that, if in one of the tracts, let's say the multifamily one, tract 3, when they submit a development plan, is it for the entire tract?
So the current regulations of PD 49, and these are proposed to be retained with this amendment, it just says a development plan for tracts 1, 2, and 3 must be submitted and approved by the City Plan Commission prior to construction. I think that language is sort of open-ended on purpose. They could submit a development plan for all three tracts at once, or they could submit 3 separate development plans.
But if in fact they submitted, let's say, the multifamily, I just want to be very clear on this, and I believe it's tract 3 that's the multifamily, because right now we don't know if that's going to be high-rise apartments or partial single family. But if they submit that development plan and they're planning both a high-rise, let's say, and some single family, they must do all of that for the entire tract.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's
the
correct.
Development plan. Thank you.
And if they didn't, they would need to come back through the full zoning process and create a new tract 3A, or whatever, if they wanted to separate out the development of tract 3. And again, that would come through the full zoning process. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, commissioners? Thank you, Mr. Wolke. Before we go on to the next case, just let the record reflect that Commissioners Van and Housewright joined us today at 10:20 a.m. and Commissioners Anderson and Hawk at 10:45 a.m. That will move to case number 2.
Okay, next case I have for you today is Z212-154. The request is for a specific use permit for a foster home on property zoned a DA duplex district. It's located at the northwest corner of Forney Road and Lomax Drive, and it's approximately half an acre. Here we see a location map of the property within city limits. Here we see an aerial map with the property outlined in blue. Here we see a zoning map with surrounding districts and land uses. To the north and the west, zoned a duplex district are duplex uses. To the east is a public or private school within its own PD. And then to the south across Forney Road is single family zoned R75A. So there's a little background on this site. It's currently developed with a residential structure that was previously used as a handicap group dwelling unit. That's a different use that's defined in our code from the requested foster home use. The applicant proposes to use this existing structure as a foster home, which requires an SUP in the duplex district. A foster home is defined as a facility that provides room, board, and supervision to 5 or more persons under 18 years of age who are not related by blood, marriage, or adoption to the owner or operator of the facility. With this request, the applicant does not propose any changes to the existing building footprint, parking, or driveways. And again, some more history. On March 24th of this year, this case came before the commission, and at that time, the commission recommended approval of the request for a 5-year period subject to a site plan and conditions. It then proceeded to City Council on May 11th of this year, where Council remanded the case back to the commission, or remanded the case to commission. Since that time, no changes have been made to the request since it was remanded by Council or since it was recommended for approval by the commission. So this is on Lomax Drive looking west at the front of the building. And some closer in views of the front of the building. And this is a view along the side of the lot along Lomax Drive. And this is a view of the alley behind the lot looking north. So surrounding uses, this is on Lomax Drive looking north at some of those other duplex uses at the street. This is a view of the school on the other side of the road, looking east, sorry, not looking west. This is the proposed site plan for the property. As you can see, they're not proposing to change the existing building footprints or the driveways or the parking stalls that are in the back. With that, staff's recommendation is still approval for a 5-year period, subject to a site plan and conditions.
Thank you very much. Questions, Commissioner Young?
To the best of your knowledge, why did the council remand the case?
We were not given any information. I think the best piece of info we got was that the council member wanted the newly assigned city plan commissioner to take a look at the case as well.
Okay, there wasn't a problem with the notice or anything like that?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Rubin.
I know when we saw this case the first time, there were a couple neighbors who submitted ballots in opposition, right? But not this time around, right?
Please hold.
Well, let me just ask you this,
Sure.
Mr. Mulkey. I'm sure we can all find that out, and you can just have you heard any opposition from anyone to this case since it's been sent back to us?
I have not, no,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you.
And there were no reply forms in opposition.
Any other questions, commissioners?
Yes, sir.
Please, Commissioner Anderson.
Do you know the occupancy of the building that they're anticipating to make sure that it can align with parking requirements? And are there any amenities outside of the property that would allude to them supporting the foster kids that would be then housed in the building?
Yeah, so in terms of occupancy, they would need to meet the standard occupancy requirements of a foster home. If that's defined at the local level, it would be through building inspections, so I couldn't confirm that, but I believe it's actually defined at the state level, which obviously the city would not get into. And as far as amenities, you could see from the site photos, there was a bit of landscaping and seating at the front of the property. But to the best of my knowledge, there are no other amenities provided on the site. However, the applicant does have a presentation this afternoon if needed, so they could speak to that at that time as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Monk, is there a school right across the street from this
Yes.
site? Thank you. School.
Question.
Is that Commissioner Van?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
When this originally came to the commission, was there any reason behind the 5-year period, or could there be an option for either a lesser period? From my understanding coming in, as this case was already worked, it seemed like there was some pushback from community residents that was concerned about safety issues and what type of, I guess, people that would be, using the dwelling. I'm not sure if that's something that we can even get into, but if there was an opportunity to reduce the 5-year period down to a 2-year period, then we could, look at, the concerns that were addressed. But as mentioned earlier, I have not seen or heard of any formal objections to the case as it stands.
Yeah, so to the issue of safety, just as a reminder to you and to your fellow commissioners, the scope of staff's review is zoning and land use only. Any kind of safety issues would be addressed through other departments like police, code, et cetera. As far as the time period, we do tend to have sort of typical time periods we recommend on some of our more common SUPs, like alcohol sales in conjunction with the C-store and stuff like that. I was not able to find like a typical time frame for a foster home because we don't receive a lot of SUP requests for this use. We did feel that a 5-year period without auto renewal was an appropriate amount of time for the applicant to, finish the permitting process and get settled into the site and kind of demonstrate if they would be a good neighbor or not. Before they would need to go before the commission again to renew the SUP. But of course, the commission could also recommend a shorter time period with or without auto renewal if they so choose.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in my ignorance, I'm wondering, so the foster care designation alludes to the use that we'll be having at this building, but the building is a house that's typically residential, and the fact that it is foster kids triggers what kind of review? I mean, because I would think that it's just a tenant in the building as opposed to a designated tenant like a foster organization. And if that's the case, does that not trigger a multifamily approach? And this is just in my ignorance, so could you kind of help clarify that for me?
Yeah, so all of your questions would be addressed by someone in building inspections. Anything internal to the building, like any sort of upgrades they would need to do to comply with multifamily or commercial building codes, all of that would be through the permitting process, not through the zoning process. We would just be concerned with, does this use meet the definition of our code, and how is it allowed within the existing zoning district?
So with the building department, if they were to determine that this would be considered multifamily, would that then not come back under our purview here at the CPC?
No, that would just probably trigger a requirement they'd have to meet some sort of multifamily building code instead of a single family building code. I think multifamily, it just gets into the realm of commercial building code at that point, but that would all be reviewed administratively through the permitting process.
In your experience, because I know you review all of these all the time, do you feel like this is an acceptable use or an exceptional use for the property?
That's a good way to phrase that question. Yeah, like all I can really say is that staff has no objections to this use within this zoning district at this location. The site was used previously as a handicap group dwelling unit, which is another sort of assisted living type use that's sort of non-residential, sort of a group home type use that's allowed with certain restrictions in a residential district. That's pretty much as far as our review would go, and we don't really have any objections to what's being proposed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Commissioner Stanton.
Yes, Mr. Mulkey. My understanding, and correct me if I'm incorrect, but that like a child care facility in an apartment or a group home, a foster care home must get a certificate of occupancy afterwards in order to operate. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
Thank
And
you.
that comes after the full permitting review process.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Rubin.
Thanks. Just two quick follow-up questions. One, the code allows foster homes by SUP in a duplex district like this,
Correct.
right? So that's the council's judgment there. And the other question is, are there other levels of government or government entities that regulate foster homes in the state of Texas?
Foster homes, handicap group dwelling units, group homes, et cetera. I can't answer any questions about those.
But we're not the sole regulators here, right?
Right, yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and the code does refer for a lot of these uses to state code requirements.
And you did state that the applicant will be here this afternoon?
Correct.
Perfect. Commissioner
Here
Blair.
or virtually, or they will be present, yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Commissioner Blair.
I think I just only have one question with foster homes, and I don't know if you can answer it or if it's a question that is done through the foster home code division. Does foster homes have the same proximity rule as they do in boarding houses that says that you can't have more than one within a 1,500-foot area of another?
I don't believe so. I did have a case last year for a handicap group dwelling unit that does have that spacing limitation. I'm not sure if a foster home, which is a separate use, has that
I know
same-
you said that before, if I may. I know you said before that this was used as a group home dwelling,
handicap group dwelling unit.
and which means, if I remember correctly, doesn't that mean that it would have had to already satisfy any type of spacage, for lack of a better way of putting it, space use or space limitation?
So for that use, which again is not this use, it's another use, there is a spacing requirement, and the only time an SUP for that use is required in a residential district is if that spacing requirement is not met. Otherwise, they just need to get a C of O. And for the foster home use, there is no spacing requirement. So you could have the duplex unit next door, for example, could also be a foster home, and it wouldn't be in violation of code, at least in that sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Rubin.
Just one more quick, are you aware of any other SUPs for foster homes in the area? And if there were another foster home that wanted to come in right next door, proximity saturation is something that we might be able to consider under the SUP criteria.
Sure, but it would still be, and it would still require an SUP in this district, so it
Great.
would come before the
Okay.
commission.
Perfect.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, let's move on to the next case.
Okay, the third and final case I have for you today is Z212-209. The request is for an IR Industrial Research District on property zoned an MU3 Mixed Use District. It's located on the north line of North Stemmons Freeway, east of Commonwealth Drive, and it's approximately 0.73 acre. Here we see a location map with the property and city limits. It's centrally located. Here we see an aerial map with the area of request outlined in blue, and a zoning map with surrounding districts and land uses. To the north, across a railroad right-of-way and I think some floodplain, is single family. To the east are general merchandise uses. To the south, across the freeway, is a hotel or motel use. And then to the west is a vehicle display sales and service use. The property is currently undeveloped. The applicant proposes to develop the site with vehicle display sales and service to be used in conjunction with the adjacent vehicle display sales and service immediately to the west. To do this, they're requesting an IR district, which is the current zoning of the adjacent lot. The IR district would allow vehicle display sales and service subject to residential adjacency review. So these are the site photos. This is on North Stemmons Freeway, looking north at the front of the property. This just kind of goes around in an arc. And then surrounding uses, this is the existing vehicle display sales and service to the west. More views of that site. This is the hotel or motel to the south, and the general merchandise to the east. These are the existing and proposed development standards of the existing MU3 district and the proposed IR district. In many ways, they're fairly similar. The max height for IR, it would be reduced by 70 feet. What else? Urban form setback would not apply in IR. Tower spacing would also not apply in IR. And obviously the uses permitted would be different. And with that, staff's recommendation is approval, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Stanner.
I'm sorry I'm asking so many questions today, but part of it's a learning thing. I'm curious, why can't you operate auto sales in an MU3 district?
We'd have to go back in time to whenever MU3 was adopted, I think in 1987, and ask those folks.
So
I know vehicle display sales and service is a pretty wide category. It, obviously allows for a really formal, like Vandergriff type dealership. That's an Arlington reference. Maybe you guys don't understand that. But it also allows for used car lots, which can get pretty, I don't know, overrun, I guess, in sort of heavier commercial districts. So there may be an interest in restricting it that way. But again, I'm trying to read someone's mind. So.
Yeah, because when this popped up, I was sort of, well, this is unusual. They're asking from MU3 to go to industrial. I hadn't seen a lot of that, so it was just curious to me. Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Hampton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mulkey, did staff review the Stemmons Corridor Southwest District Medical District Area Plan? Sorry, I got those words out of order.
We did. No, it's okay. That area plan does apply to this area. However, we didn't really see any kind of indication one way or the other, if that area plan supported or did not support this this request. That plan mainly talks about the vision for the medical district and, how it's envisioned as high density with transit-oriented development and stuff like that. And in this case, kind of, we saw that the area plan didn't have a ton of bearing one way or the other on this request.
So the MU3 probably reflects the overarching goal of this, but because of the location of this site, it maybe does not have as much influence as other locations may have.
Correct.
Thank you. And I think you covered this in your report, but this request is to really allow the existing business to expand for
correct.
Additional sales and storage on site.
Correct.
And did they provide you with a concept site plan of how they intend to use the site just to evaluate?
They did. I had our contacts in engineering and with the city arborist look at it. They didn't have a ton of comments. I believe Mr. Navarez just said that they would need to label the existing curb cuts for this site as to be removed because it would just connect to the existing site. We wouldn't need additional curb cuts there. But there wasn't a lot of other feedback other than that.
And the site will be required to comply with Article 10, is that correct?
That's correct.
And while there's different standards between MU3 and IR, I believe I communicated with Mr. Irwin and you were on those emails as well. He did not have any concerns. There's surface parking lot standards and other provisions that will apply to this location. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I would need to meet standard requirements.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Young.
Yes, in further response to Commissioner Standard's question, Mr. Mulkey was on the right track. When the MU districts were developed, MU3 was conceived as an upscale, high-intensity district, and it was perceived that some of the uses would be incompatible with that. And so you'll find that, ironically, the number of permitted uses declines as you go from MU1 to MU2 to MU3.
Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, in my ignorance, the industrial research designation, do they intend to conduct research?
Yeah, I'm not sure where the research part of the title of that zoning district comes from. I'm sure Commissioner Young could regale us with more zoning history. I believe it's intended for lighter industrial uses as well as any kind of like R&D operations that we would be associated with a firm that conducts light industrial operations.
Well, I think it's interesting. The research, the R&D, could be an interesting and critical component in really supporting what an area plan might have intended with an MU3, of course, it being walkable and mixed use, but to have an industry alluded to with the industrial designation would be interesting. But I'm wondering also, at what point does an applicant request a variance as opposed to the change of the PD?
Variances would not come through this body. They would come through the Board of Adjustment. Well, but could they not have started with a variance and then gone through that process as opposed to this body? Yeah, I've never reported to a Board of Adjustment, but that's for really determining if a hardship exists on the property, that an owner, there's some sort of site condition or something that like absolutely prevents them from being able to meet standard code. It would not extend so far as what land uses are permitted within a zoning district. That would be a zoning change to allow for the land use.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mulkey. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions, commissioners, on this item? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Mulkey.
Thank you.
Commissioners, case number 4 is going to be held under advisement to September 4th. We will brief it then. Case number 5 will also be held under advisement to August 18th. We will brief that then. Number 6, under advisement to August 4th. We'll brief that at our next hearing. Number 7, held under advisement till August 4th. But I think Mr. Pepe does have a couple updates for us. Thank you.
Good morning. Yes, so this one is Z201321. We've gone over it several times, but we have received some updates. They were yesterday. I think I had them distributed this morning. So I understand you probably haven't had a chance to look at them. But we do have them here just to get things going. I understand we're going to hold it, but just want to get the thought process rolling and answer potential questions that might guide any final revisions between now and then. So this is the updated development plan. What's updated is primarily they added permeable paving to their parking lots, and that is backed up in condition within the PD conditions. We'll go into that further later. They updated their sidewalk width on Fort Worth Avenue, and they added additional walkways that are clearly marked from the sidewalk within this development plan. And the nature of those pathways is a little better described within the conditions. But those are the primary changes, I believe. And so the updates are in regards to these conditions. These are all in regards to the conditions. So just get it going. The maximum setback, 15 remains the max setback on the property within the subdistrict. They originally requested no maximum setback globally within the subdistrict. Now it states no maximum setback applies for a structure containing general merchandise or food store greater than 3,500 square feet, which is, of course, the use that they're proposing in the development plan. But it does single out that use. It's somewhat in recognition of it's difficult oftentimes to do those large sorts of stores and have them oriented close to the street. So it's to accommodate only that use that is being proposed at this time, but other development types, future development years down the road would still have that maximum setback that keeps the building close to the street. Further, for the outbuildings, which are smaller than 10,000 feet, conditions state the maximum setback may be increased to 75 feet only when they provide a patio or open space between the sidewalk or the front facade. So both of the plan buildings on the development plan have something of an open space provided between those two, sort of a patio that's not for parking, it's for public use. Those are provided on here, so it sort of accommodates the relaxation of the maximum setback with the provision that they have that open space. So that should accommodate those two outbuildings. And so that provision is described right there and in the conditions. Previously, this is sort of related to the maximum setback. The PD generally overall calls for 25% or one aisle of parking only to be located in front of the structures that face streets. They asked for full exemption of that previously. Now we're looking at this only applies in developing the general merchandise or food store of the proposed size. And they added condition for permeable paving, which adds language for permeable paving and bioswales to be used where 2 rows of surface parking abut. It's depicted on the development plan previously. Whoops, I might have skipped one. So they added sidewalk language. It's a little more targeted to what they're trying to do. Adds a pedestrian safety standard for level curb cuts and driveway crossings. They also asked for exemption from the streetscaping standards and exhibits previously. So that would have meant that they would have 6-foot sidewalks on the whole subdistrict. In this version, they still have that 12-foot required sidewalk on Fort Worth Avenue, though they've relaxed it on Hampton Avenue. But the hope is this development's kind of focused towards Fort Worth Avenue, which keeps that 12-foot continuous. They previously asked for exemption from the PD's 20% minimum of transparency. Now they're looking at a 30% minimum of street facing to either be transparent or a painted work of art. So it increases the percent that has to be an activated wall, but they can sub in some walls for like a painted work of art, like a mural. And that's to activate blank walls. And, often blank walls are found on the side walls of grocery stores where there's a freezer section, there's whatever. So the default transparency in the PD might have made it difficult to develop it. as the grocery store that they're proposing. So that's another option. The applicant added a provision that would require 25% of the facades have an awning or gallery or arcade. It's talking about the front facade of the main grocery building. So they accepted that condition. And they also added provision for a more clearly defined pedestrian pathway from the street, being Fort Worth Avenue. And that would be required to have like a shade cover of a trellis or a treed pathway, something to that effect, to clearly delineate and safely guide pedestrians from the street into the site. Sort of accommodates a farther setback with the condition that passageway is a little safer and more clearly delineated into the site. And so those are in the copy of the docket, or excuse me, not the docket, the conditions I circulated this morning. And then I received one more little tweak this morning, being they added a condition restricting against restaurant or financial institution with a drive-through within 200 feet of the Fort Worth Avenue frontage. So it's currently an allowed use on this site, but within this sub-district, it would now be restricted against that first 200 feet along Fort Worth Avenue. But that doesn't completely preclude it from the site, and it carves out the northwest corner as a potential site that they could have the drive-through, but that is the more highway-oriented side of the development, but it keeps it away from Fort Worth Avenue pretty significantly. So staff recommendation is approval is briefed, subject to a development plan and conditions. Do I have any questions?
Thank you very much. Questions, Commissioner Ruda?
Yeah, just a few. So let me just, I'm trying to understand timeline here. The new condition, obviously it's being held, but the new conditions were circulated to us this morning. How long have you had to evaluate them?
Good question. So these are sort of things that myself, the applicant, and the commissioner have been kind of workshopping over 2 weeks at least.
Okay.
At least 2 weeks. So while y'all have had totally fair, very little time to review them, I have had, because I had been proposing them to the
And my intent behind that question, not to impugn anyone, just to make sure that staff has had adequate time since the recommendation has flipped. And my other question, and I haven't had time to read these yet, but I'm just trying to square the parking location language in your slide with the grocery store that's going to be on the site. Did you say that it only applies to things that actually abut Fort Worth Avenue or Hampton? So would that parking location language not apply to the grocery store?
So the default PD calls for 25% or one aisle of parking at maximum to be located in front of the structure. And so the way they've written it is they only offer they're exempt from that. So you can have more than one row of parking or aisle of parking when developing the general merchandise or food store. So talking about the grocery.
Oh, okay. Now it's working for me.
There's usually that is in there, but we're making it a little more targeted just for this particular use.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Young.
First of all, do I understand your recommendation is now approval as briefed, even though the docket shows denial?
The docket, yes. So
Okay.
that is the brief that I'm making right now, that is to say.
Okay.
So with these amended conditions, we've been working with them for a while, and these are more targeted exceptions than the previous, the original iteration, and so it's not a denial as the docket.
Okay, and my next question is probably for the arborist. Is Mr. Irwin online? If not, I'll do it at the hearing.
If you want
It's not online.
If you want to ask, I can give him a heads up for later.
The question is, on two of the species lists in the existing PD, I see white ash and urbanite ash. And my questions are they susceptible to the emerald ash borer? And if so, do we need to take them out?
Okay, I'll give him a heads up. I think
Thank
I
you.
know the answer, but I don't want to answer for him. But yeah.
Commissioner Houserath.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pepe, I guess maybe I'm confused, but in your last slide, you talked about the drive-through situation, restaurants, et cetera. And the development plan, at least that I'm looking at, has drive-through on that building along Fort Worth Avenue. So would we see okay, we would see that plan. Okay.
Yeah, so
All right.
the docket one, I believe, probably still has that drive-through use. But
so this was emailed. This was in part of our email.
this was part of the morning send out. But yeah, that's where it was a drive-through. It's more of a little patio open space now. So 200 foot basically reaches right to, it basically kind of bisects this site diagonally. So it bars it from the southern half basically.
Online.
Any other questions, commissioners?
I do.
Commissioner Popkin, please.
Yes, Mr. Pepe, could you recap our conversations about trees along Fort Worth Avenue, especially as it relates to replacing a spot that requires a tree with 2 small trees? I believe that was added also.
Yeah, great question, and that's good to clarify on the record. So that's part of what we've talked about in fixing up the streetscape conditions on Fort Worth and Hampton. We added additional language for where trees can be placed so that it calls for consistent placing of trees. But we did add an exception because we know that there's power lines along the side that say that 2 small trees can be substituted for a large tree, but typically it's going to be the large trees that are required. But when there's a conflict with the power lines, we added a little exception for 2 small trees because it's pretty common. But we don't want to create any unintended consequences on that streetscape.
And do you have off the top of your head, can you remind me what that setback is between the sidewalk and the right of way for that tree planting?
Good question. I believe they have 20 foot, they have to be 20 foot from the curb, the trees, whichever they go with. And that 20 foot is to give them a little flexibility, but 20 foot, if you're talking about a large tree is you're probably still gonna have your canopy near the sidewalk either way. So it's kind of says they can either probably be on one side of the sidewalk or the other. I believe we put that in to accommodate the water line on Fort Worth Avenue to give them some flexibility.
Let's confirm that before this afternoon. I think that would also allow the trees along Fort Worth Avenue to be planted atop the small retaining wall. Is that correct? Adjacent to the sidewalk?
Maybe just on top. In terms of distance.
Okay.
But that's the maximum.
Okay.
But that's the maximum. It's not a mandate that they have to be 20.
Okay, got it. Okay, thanks.
But they would want to maybe do that in the situation that there is a conflict with the water lines.
And we also did discuss required distance of parking spaces to trees in the parking lot, and that is required in the PD at 70 foot, correct? 75.
Yes, that's built into the PD at this time. We evaluated it, saw if it would, if altering that would have the desired effect. So we determined, myself and landscape staff, that the 75 foot with that's already called for in the PD is good. So they'll have to put that in the various landscape islands that you see on the plan.
And also remind me, along Hampton, if that sidewalk were to be widened to 12 foot, that would mean that some of the existing trees would need to come out. Is that correct?
You're talking about the sidewalk?
Along Hampton. Mm-hmm.
Oh, on Hampton.
That part of that rationale for keeping it at 6 feet is to save those trees that are existing along the roadway.
You're correct.
Okay. All right, thank you for that clarity. I appreciate. Also one more thing. Where are we now on number of parking spaces? I believe we were 18 over before recommended parking.
You know what? I didn't run a count on these on this plan yet. I can do that before the afternoon. But you know, we just got this one, but that's the one thing I haven't done is count.
Thank you so much for your last minute diligent work on this. I know we've been working down to the wire, and sometimes these meetings create a good kind of deadline for things to be finalized. I'm glad we're at least going to have 2 more weeks to look this over. So thanks for your hard work on this.
No problem.
Commissioner Stanton.
Okay, I apologize if I missed this when Commissioner Housewright asked it. On the updated development plan that you have this morning, which I don't have, is that it? So
Yes.
is the drive-through still there?
Not in the southern portion of the site that the condition is referring to. So there's no drive-through lane on this one. So this is an entrance to the site for trucks, cars, whatever. There's a drive aisle to get to the main part of the parking lot. But where there was a drive-through, there's a kind of an open space or patio
Okay.
on the southern part of that building.
This is what I wanted to make sure of. So now there's no drive-through, correct?
Along
There had
Fort
been
Worth.
one there.
Along Fort Worth.
Pardon?
There was one located right off of Fort Worth Avenue. No longer, not on this one.
Okay, and so now that this has been changed, is that being changed in the conditions too? They can't turn around and put another drive-through in there?
You got it. That's so,
That's
you know,
what I wanted to
we're
make
cool
sure
with,
of.
with putting things in the plan, and that's great. But it's also the last minute, the last minute condition I got was to incorporate no drive-through use within 200 feet of Fort Worth Avenue. So that
Okay.
includes
That's what I
basically all
wanted
of
to know.
this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've got a couple of questions. Is this a part of the West Oak Cliff area that would be considered in the West Oak Cliff area plan?
I don't believe so.
No.
Is
I-
there an
I can
area
com-
plan in the area that this site relates to?
No, not existing.
Related to the signage and murals, I'm wondering, and it's just general questions. If so, you say that there is an acceptable transparency or painted murals. I'm wondering if that could include graphic murals like wraps and things like that, as opposed to just painted murals.
You know, I didn't think of that. We put it as painted work of art to make it clear that it's affixed to the building. How I'm reading it, because we wrote it pretty specifically, it doesn't include a wrap. And I also understand it doesn't include any kind of business signage as it stands. It'd have to be not advertising a product or business, as I understand it, at least overtly.
Would it be advantageous to add terminology about graphic wraps and because even on a front-facing facade, you could have a measure of opacity that allows it to still meet those requirements, but I wouldn't want them to have the hurdle of saying, well, it's a graphic and it could cause some problems.
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about potentially if it was desire, you could have an so that's another option. Because the point of the painted work of art was another option where transparency would be difficult, but that's a fine idea.
Well, then also I know a little bit about that area, and there's this notion of we can paint buildings and put works of art up, and they often aren't really, or they shouldn't be sanctioned. So I wanted to bring that up, but also lastly, could we have more heat island mitigation tactics in the site plan in terms of trees? I do know you have bioswales and things that will control the water runoff, but there's going to be a ton of heat on that concrete.
Yeah, so we do have, the PD thankfully has built in the 70 feet between the any given parking space and a large tree. So that's going to call for large trees within the parking lot in addition to the permeable paving and bioswales. And then we have large trees on the perimeter of the site. So it's definitely difficult to decrease heat island effect with surface parking, with the high parking requirement that's there. But I think they've done a lot to mitigate what you're talking about.
They have, but even in those small islands in the turnarounds, there can be trees that cause it's just about shading the pavement, not necessarily the people. So just kind of thinking about that, and that would be the end of my questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Hampton.
Thank you. Mr. Pepe, just following up on Commissioner Anderson's suggestions, you might consider reviewing some of the Deep Ellum signage standards, which I think integrate a number of the concepts that he mentioned and might be a good reference point for you as you consider these options.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions, commissioners?
I have some.
Please, Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes, Mr. Pepe, how does this essentially suburban layout comply with either the vision or the specifics of PD 714? Because what I see is parking lot all at the street front.
Yes, so they have done things to better activate the street, removing some of the drive-through use, activating the sidewalk better, creating a way or better pathways from the exterior to the interior. So, and not only that, not only are they pathways, they have to have a form of shelter and being the trellis or the trees. So that's definitely something that, at the very least, facilitates flow through into the site, makes it easy to walk from the site. We did not ultimately make any variation from the standard on the sidewalk on Fort Worth Avenue. So that is retained, and those buildings have moved a little closer to the street than previously proposed. So there's definitely improvement, and in some relations, it's certainly an improvement to the site, which is also kind of laid out as a surface parking lot as it is right now. But it will at least make it more accessible to get into the site, out of the site as a pedestrian, as a transit rider, as a bike rider.
But in your opinion, is this more of a suburban layout?
The base standards called for in the PD that are remaining in place for most uses definitely call for a more urban format than here. The exceptions given are only to this use. So I would agree that it's less dense and urban than the PD will call for in other circumstances.
Right. So I understand that the exceptions are given for this use, but these uses are enabling an essentially suburban layout. Correct.
I think that the way that they've written the conditions is one of the best possible ways they could have a layout like this. So the layout may be reminiscent of something more autocentric or suburban, but the other standards that they put in are the best possible version of that layout in terms of design and accommodation for trees and landscaping.
Right, but would you say they're adding a few urban tweaks to an essentially suburban layout?
The design standards that they were written, I would say acknowledge the difficulty or some of the difficulties of the grocery store use, and the design challenges in building that out. And it improves upon the base original proposal and what you would typically see for a grocery store layout. But it might not be as perfect or urban as you might see in a closer into town, for instance.
Right. Were you aware that we were able to convince Aldi to abandon their usual suburban layout to do something that was more in compliance with the requirements of the PD? And that's just a few blocks to the west of this.
I'm not sure what site you're talking about.
Right. Well, back to this specific site. Where is the primary facade of this, the former drive-through restaurant that's up on Fort Worth Avenue? Where is the primary facade and where is the primary customer entrance? Because according to the PD, they're supposed to be they're supposed to be facing the street.
Yeah, so based on the use where we, or excuse me, not the use, the provision in regards to the open space and increasing the maximum setback for those outbuildings, they're required to have a primary building entrance with access to the exterior sidewalk. They're also required to have a pedestrian gateway in one of the other conditions. So you're right what the PD says about the primary entrances. Entrances are not really marked on this development plan, but this condition does state that the open space between the sidewalk and the front facade has got to have a primary building entrance with access to the sidewalk. So that's going to be called for in condition, even if it's not depicted in the development plan.
This may be a building inspection question. Is it a primary entrance or the primary entrance? Because my understanding of the PD is that it's supposed to be the main customer entrance was supposed to be facing the public right away.
I gotcha. So I might need to get clarification on that, but in this case, it does say a primary building entrance. So if the PD calls for the primary entrance, then they're going to have to put a primary entrance here per the condition. So that should kind of settle it.
All right. Is it marked on the development plan here exactly where the patio outdoor space is supposed to be? Because it just may be my. I know
you can
this morning.
You can see it. I think it would probably be a little terraced patio that kind of sits right next to Fort Worth Avenue there. And then they marked a little pedestrian gateway in orange to the southwest of that building site. So that open space appears to meet the condition that is necessary to increase the maximum setback.
Okay. Aren't outdoor patio areas usually labeled on these development plans?
I don't know if they're required to be, but we could ask them to add it in if we wanted.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners? And again, just a reminder, this case will be held under advisement till August 4th. Commissioner Popkin?
Just to follow up on Commissioner Stannard's question about the drive-through, there's still another drive-through on this site, correct, Mr. Pepe?
Yes, correct. And so that's that's in the northwestern portion. The conditions don't give them ability to move it much closer to Fort Worth, but it is limited only to the freeway facing side of the site.
And if the developer were to decide to have a different tenant there, if they have trouble getting a drive-through that wants to site here, what would be the process for allowing a non-drive-through tenant here? Would that have to be a full zoning change, or is that a minor amendment?
To remove the drive-through lane likely would be a minor amendment, and then they'd have to meet the conditions as we've still written them. But they'd need that minor process to remove that, but not a zoning change. So it's a it's a feasible change within the bounds of the condition. So it's although the drive-through's there, it could be removed fairly easily.
So as written, if there's a drive-through on that portion of the site, they're required to have a primary entrance from the sidewalk and an outdoor seating area. But if the drive-through is removed, then it's a minor amendment to take it off the development plan, and then they're subject to the other requirements of the PD that require them to have a primary entrance off of the sidewalk and a setback of no greater than 15 feet, right?
Yeah, well, yes. The way we've written the maximum setback exception says so either they can increase their setback and have a activated patio, or they can meet the 15-foot maximum setback based on what you were just talking about. So it, as written, if they removed the drive-through, it's still an either or, but you can still see the benefit in the patio in exchange for the slightly increased setback.
Okay, and then follow up to the other commissioner's question, I forget who, about whether this is in the West Oak Cliff area plan. Though it's not in that plan, a PD is basically a vision for the area, and the vision of this PD is basically a pretty good area plan of sorts, right? It allows 60 feet of height and defines the desire as mixed use and multi-story, correct?
Yes, I would agree with you on that. Not many PDs are as clear with their intention, their goals, their vision, but this one gets that point across, and there's definitely an urban mixed-use layout that's available by right in the PD.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I look forward to continuing the conversation on this one.
Thank you.
I have one
Any other
additional.
Commissioner Carpenter?
No, I just wanted to say, as a question, Mr. Pepe, are you aware there is a Fort Worth Avenue West Commerce land use plan that was done that kind of moved along with the PD?
I am now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both.
Really quick, Mr.
Commissioner Anderson.
Is there a way to be concerned about queuing for a potential drive-through to ensure that it does not come out onto Fort Worth Avenue?
Yeah, that's totally fine. So it is authorized in the district under the provisions of a DIR review. So that process still has to take place, and that usually aids in those sorts of things. So the DIR review should still be there, and they still have minimum queuing lengths that they have to meet. So there is a process beyond if they do propose that use for that to be reviewed for those purposes.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioners, thank you very much, Mr. Pepe. Cases number 8 and 9 are both going to be held their advisement to August 18th. That takes us to case number 10, Sal Gayer. Mhm. Which one? I have it from, well, he's kind of watching, but he said.
Okay. Good morning, Commissioners. This is case number 10 Z212207, an application for an LI Light Industrial District with deed restrictions volunteered by the applicant on property zoned an AA Agricultural District on the northwest line of Telephone Road between Bonneview Road and Van Horn Drive. Applicant proposes to develop the property with a warehouse use, and it is approximately 13.5 acres. Located in District 8. Area of request is outlined in red. It's currently zoned AA. There is a small lot adjacent to the area of request right here that is developed with a single family use. But everything surrounding to the east has gradually been changed from an AA district to LI or CS with deed restrictions that have been volunteered. There's also a LI district to the west that does have a large conservation easement surrounding that property. Why am I not? The platted property that's adjacent to the west that is still zoned AA and developed with single family use, there's the main structure is towards the rear of the lot, adjacent to the property line shared with the area of request site. And the accessory building is actually to the front of the main structure, set back 50 feet from the front property line. At site visit, it appeared to be that there was an equipment rental or some type of business operating out of that front accessory building. However, the city of Dallas officially recognizes that property as developed with single family use. There's no CO that I could find for any business to operate on the property. And the structure was permitted as a detached garage to be accessory to the single family. Newton Creek runs southwest northeast at the rear of the property. And as I mentioned, there's a large conservation easement surrounding. Wow, that was fun. Let's try that again. I'm going to blame it on Mike. Maybe. Okay, there we go. So some photographs of the site. This is the northeast edge of the site taken from across Telephone Road. Excuse me. And then looking southwest along Telephone Road, the site is on the right of your screen, and on the left of the screen would be what is CO'd as a contractor's maintenance yard. And then you can see single family beyond the area of request, both on both sides of Telephone Road. Looking at the site from across Telephone Road, it's currently undeveloped. And then surrounding uses, this is the adjacent single family. You can see the main structure is recessed towards the rear of the property, and the accessory structure is towards the front. Like I said, it looks like there's a business operating out of it, but it is officially accessory to single family. The city thinks there's a garage there. And then looking away from the site, The conservation easement would be on the right of your screen, and then single family on the left of the screen across Telephone Road. Here's a closer look at that single family. And it is right at the intersection with Travis Trail. Directly across from the site is a contractor's maintenance yard, and I liked their landscape buffer. So here's a picture of their landscape buffer. And then also across from the site, across Telephone Road, there's some commercial motor vehicle parking to the north. I'm losing my directions here. Southeast. There we go. Adjacent to the east is outdoor storage use. Get a little bit better picture there. And sorry, there's a delay I'm not used to. And then development standards comparing the existing AA to the proposed LI. Essentially, front yard setback will be the same due to the both districts being on the same block face, so it'll be 50-foot minimum front setback. However, the LI that's proposed would require no side or rear setback for the site. Instead of the 24-foot height max in the AA, LI would allow construction up to 70 feet, increasing the coverage from 25% to 80%. And that's essentially the highlights. Staff recommendation is denial, predominantly due to the proximity of the single family uses, both immediately adjacent to the west, southwest, and then also to the southwest across Telephone Road. However, we did receive some revised deed restrictions from the applicant this morning. We would actually request the opportunity to review those a little bit closer and speak with colleagues in some other departments and discuss with legal. So if we could have that time, I think we could have everything worked out by next hearing date.
Thank you very much. Questions? Commissioner Blair.
The part of the deed restrictions that were submitted this morning, did they not provide a greater buffer between the residential proximity and the proposed new zoning?
So what was initially verbally offered to staff a couple weeks ago, and what I think staff would be comfortable with, was essentially a 20 to 30 foot buffer, landscape buffer, and then truck traffic and overhead doors for loading and unloading restricted to the east side of the building. And what was offered today, like I said, the wording, I need to have some discussion the way that it's worded. I believe that there is a 20-foot landscape buffer that is offered. However, it's also noted that the building will be set back or no closer than 60 feet. And overhead doors, I believe, will not be, the way it's worded is that they will not be placed on the west side. So, but it's also mentioned in discussions with the representative, it was mentioned that there were going to be doors on both sides. I'm not really 100% certain where the doors are going to be, but the concern that staff has is with that 60-foot setback and the 20-foot buffer, there's no elimination of truck traffic that would be immediately adjacent to the single family residence that's right there.
Is this not near PD 761, or is this part of PD 761?
It is not part of PD 761, but it's very close. So PD 761 is just across Bonneview Road to the east. In fact, let me PD 761 is all along the east of the screen here and then a little bit to the south as well.
Leaving that's that up for just a point of reference. All surrounding this particular area, you only have one more plat of land that is zone AA from PD 761 to this site, correct?
On the
that's-
same side of Telephone, that's correct, just this property here. But then also all of this is AA, and there's single-family development right here, which would be almost immediately across from the site.
And for those commissioners that know of this particular area, because we saw it a little while ago, those residential property that is southwest.
The ones across right here?
Yeah, on Travis Trail.
Right.
Those are all zoned AA as well, is correct?
This is all zoned AA, yes.
And PD 761, isn't that our inland import that serves
It is.
the whole city?
It is. So if I may, it's not that the zoning change to an LI doesn't make sense for the location just generally, because there's been, I mean, that's sort of the pattern that is happening in the area. And it starts from PD 761, and it's been gradually making its way to the west. However, the fact remains that there are some properties in the immediate vicinity that are developed with single-family uses that we need to be mindful of. So some of the zoning changes that have happened recently in the area, if you'll notice, there's a lot of, stuff that's with deed restrictions. So some of the deed restrictions, just to give you an idea, the deed restrictions in place here with the proximity of the residential in mind, truck traffic is prohibited. No, there's no ingress or egress allowed from Travis Trail right there due to the single family that's immediately adjacent there. Some of the deed restrictions limit uses or prohibit certain uses. Staff is not as concerned with the uses being limited as with the truck traffic and the activity that would be happening or potentially happen immediately adjacent.
But isn't on the opposite, on the more western side of the AA property, isn't that also quite intense with LI and truck traffic?
Actually, no. There's like I said, there's a very large conservation easement surrounding the creek here, and then also circling around to two other sides of the development there. So,
but if I remember correctly,
right here,
we also did a on the opposite side of that. There also was a case, I think about a year ago, Sunburst Trucking that was approved for that particular area as well. So is it not noted that although there are some AA residential use, that that warehousing is inundated in this particular area, even when you go on the opposite side of Bonnie View and it's Houston Street Road that's over there. That there's north, south, east, and west. There's a lot of truck traffic.
Certainly, but not
at this one particular.
Not in a way that would be immediately impactful of those residential uses. So truck traffic would happen along the main thoroughfares. So there would be trucks going by, but we would not be then bringing them into the.
And the only way we can manage that and protect the residential uses is through buffering and deed restrictions and the way buildings are placed. And is that not correct?
At this point, with a general zoning change, if the if the applicant were to offer deed restrictions that could buffer appropriately, I think that
We could get there.
we could get there. But with just a general zoning change, I don't really think that there's a way to accomplish that without.
The deed restrictions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Considering the texture of the uses surrounding this site and the presence of the existing single-family homes, I feel like this is a good example of why we need to move forward with area plans that will preempt this kind of discussion that we're having, because we in paying, full respect to the residences that are there, that chose to live there, but also how it's developing towards light industrial could be a highest and best use kind of scenario, could be a live, work, industrial kind of development scenario, could be something that's better thought out than we deliberating about one project that then will end up having to deliberate about every other project that comes into being. The conservation district there is important, in my opinion. And it provides placemaking, sustainability, environmental awareness, all this good stuff. But how we might be able to evaluate and create concern for single family or some sort of mix, but how that wraps into light industrial is an opportunity, in my opinion. And it's something that I don't think we should shy away from that thought process. Considering that light industrial is around there. So my biggest concern would almost be like what Commissioner Blair was mentioning and infrastructure and transportation. How can we handle what's being proposed? And I feel like we are being wagged by the developer because we don't have a plan there yet. And it's moving in a direction, and this happens with a lot of areas that we end up having to make choices on, but then we'll be seen as holding up the process if we are more deliberate. So I feel like there's an opportunity at an area plan that this should align with. I feel like the uses could be seen as compatible depending on how it's evaluated. But I think there are some opportunities here, and that's where I'd like for us to begin to look at, as this will go potentially to another session, if we could figure out how we could begin to involve and hold hands with other departments so that we can get ahead of this thing, I think it would be good. And those are the ends of my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Stanton.
Yes, I sort of feel the same way that Commissioner Anderson does. This is a confusing thing because we're back to the same thing that we were doing off of Grady Niblo. We're talking about how does a warehouse and the traffic and the corridors, how does that impact the adjacent residential? This is an unusual one in particular, though, because we've got one house west of this site that in the front is operating a leasing operation in an agricultural thing. And that's what happens way out there. You start doing that, but we're kind of deliberating here over one person that lives in the back of their lot, which I have respect for. But on the other hand, I'm looking at a map of all light industrial. But again, as Commissioner Anderson says, then it becomes very important in whatever we do that we say you're going to have shore power so they don't have to listen to the trucks. You're going to have to locate it on the east side that the trucks can only drive in the east side. But then with an 85% lot coverage, are they going to move the building so close over to the residential side that becomes an albatross in itself? So it's very difficult to look at this 13-acre plat and say, okay, we'll let you do that, when all of a sudden to the west is this one single family, but then it eases in to this conservation district, and then on the southwest, it's catty-corner from residential. I feel like he does. I almost feel like, do you just allow this because that's what's going on already? And the people that are living there beware, which shows no respect, or what else could this be used for? I'm not sure that there's any other use that this could be used for. I can't see 13 acres being suddenly developed residential next to a light industrial. So my question is there another route to go to get here? Or do we just do this plot by plot?
The point is well taken that area plans are in order. And that's part of what PD 761 took care of. It's a pretty massive plan development district, and it was designed with these types of logistics uses in mind, and built into that PD. There are certain thresholds that once the development meets a certain square footage in the district, then traffic studies have to be done, and then staff looks at it and analyzes if other infrastructure needs need to be met before any other development should occur. So the point is very well taken, and I think that that's what was done, like I said, across Bonneview. This just happens to be on the fringe of that, and kind of developing along those same lines, yet they're not subject to the same types of periodic infrastructure reviews that they would be if they were in 761.
Well, I have one other question about this, a very quick one. Then is the only way to deal with this, because if you note on the, I guess you'd call it southern side of the street, it's zone CS, the ones that's closest to the residential. So is one of the few possibilities that you say, okay, this can't be light industrial, it needs to be CS to keep that truck thing from happening right next to a residential?
Well, the CS does allow the commercial motor vehicle parking to occur. So it's not that so initially where you're seeing CS with deed restrictions across Telephone Road, that request, that zoning change request initially came in as a request for an LI, light industrial, but due to the proximity of the residential uses right there, the applicant amended the request to CS and offered deed restrictions.
Well, then I would say in view of that, I'm not sure that this property shouldn't be zoned the same way, but that's just my opinion, not a question. Thank you.
Okay.
Vice Chair Rubin.
Just one quick question. I see several folks from PUD online. I'm not sure if they're all watching, but we've had a lot of talk about an area plan. What is the timeline for getting an area plan done these days?
Mike, did you want to talk about that?
See, Miss Gillis and Miss Ryan. Miss Gillis, I think I see you.
I would suggest that if Andrea Gillis is online or
She is,
Julia
and she's
Ryan may
waving her hand. So
address that.
I apologize. I didn't have audio at the time, but I believe I do have audio now. To answer your question about the area plans, a couple of things. Once they're started, it's taking close to 2 years from the point that they start going through the community process and then going through the approval process is taking about 2 years. But then we also have the issue of we have a list in line right now of different planning efforts. And so it would be determined, we'd have to be thinking about when it could actually be initiated. But I will remind folks that we do have Forward Dallas happening right now. And a lot of these land use issues can be addressed through Forward Dallas.
Commissioner Blair.
In regards to the request for, excuse me, area plan in this particular area, is it not true that the majority of the uses in this particular area is LICS, more intense warehousing and trucking than there is residential? Is that not correct?
I think that would be an accurate assessment.
So if we were looking at an area plan, we would be looking at an area plan with for the majority, which is already there, correct?
It's twofold. We start with a baseline of existing conditions, but then we have to take into account everything else that's happened since those properties were developed. And a lot of this area, because it's in an ag zone, it was either, that's sort of right now in the Dallas code, it can be used sometimes as a placeholder. And for the idea that there will be eventual planning or rezoning that goes on in the future. So just because of the existing doesn't mean that that's what we would plan for to keep it as is.
So to go on alignment with that, because this is a very good question for a lot of territory in the South. Those houses on Travis Trail, they're zoned ag, but they're not ag. They're not, when we talk about agriculture, or we were thinking about either farmland, or we were thinking about acreage that had livestock. Is that not correct? And the properties on Travis Trail are more adequately, the use is more adequately, would be more adequately zoned R5, R7, R10.
That depends actually. So I will say this, that there are a lot of properties in the South. So when we think of ag, it's not necessarily the farming industry per se. There can also be sort of ranchettes. Oftentimes you'll have, it's usually, if there's housing on it, it's usually a larger acre type housing development. But we have to remember, we've got the ag zone, but then we also had the history of cumulative zoning, which is a lot of times what's happening in these areas as well, and not because of necessarily the ag zoning.
But no, I'm talking about the property that's on Travis Trail. There's 28 lots that are single family use, that's all zoned agricultural, but has no agricultural type of use. So those particular 28 lots that are zoned agricultural, that are being residentially used, that are not in an agricultural, should not somewhere, well, that's a theoretical question. I'm gonna take that back, but because there's really no true answer. So, and it doesn't, that would put you in an unfair position to try to answer that. So I apologize. But the land across the way is zoned agricultural. It is sitting at 5 acres, I believe. It has a residential lot at the, a residential use at the rear, and it has a residential building that was a supportive building that is currently being used maybe as a business, from what the report is saying. So if you have on one hand a business it's confusing because there's no CO and but it seems as though it may be, the use may be along the same lines as the LI that's on the one side, and the C, or maybe the CS that's across the street. So we're having to look at this from actual use, intended use, and zoning use in order to decide what's the best use of land for this one particular lot that we're discussing today. And so I believe that we're confused.
I would say justifiably so. I don't know if there's, I mean, I think that there are a lot of areas like this in the city that we are absolutely going they're going to be some of our priorities for when we look at, when looking through the lens of Forward Dallas for future land use. Some of these areas that don't have that land use component to them, and really that's either been developed out of the ag district or out of cumulative zoning. They're the farther reaches of the city, particularly in the south. Those are going to be some of our priority areas to really look deeply at the future land use component and sort some of these things out, because it is a challenge.
So if one of the things that was said was Forward Dallas, that we're looking at this with the lens of Forward Dallas. The lens of Forward Dallas did not, the Forward Dallas lens not say this is to be used for inland import, for warehousing, in order to get products, this is products and services throughout wherever we need to, that this is what this land was supposed to be used for.
Are you asking me if that's what Forward Dallas would say?
Yes.
We have to, we need to dive further into that. I can't tell you that off the top of my head without doing further, without spanning out a little bit further to look at the conditions around it.
Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to offer, I think there is opportunity at area plans. Speaking from experience, we need, for instance, 14 area plans. And I know that procurement has the ability for pre-qualified lists of professional services, for creating a path to which we could address all of these area plans in a 2 to 3 month time frame using consultants. And I understand that that would require a budget, but in the essence of time and the amount of subject matter that we need to cover, there should be an area plan process that we engage. Otherwise, we're going to spin our wheels around these kinds of projects several more times as they continue to come up on the docket. And in our lack of, well, potential, because I know these guys are on this horseshoe are pretty bright, but we are not subject matter experts in order to determine how all of these things could fit together, or visionaries in creating different ways that they could then be compiled. I think that we should figure out a way.
Commissioner Anderson,
potential
or Mr. Chair, if I may. Commissioner
Yes.
Anderson, this is the briefing and this is an opportunity to ask questions of staff. Your comments are kind of getting into discussion, and that would be appropriate at the public hearing, but for briefing purposes, it's you should only ask questions of staff.
Okay, so directed to the staff. Can we create an area plan process that begins to cover the topics that would help us to deal with these cases more readily and more quickly than a 2-year process?
I think the answer to that is we are working on Forward Dallas right now, which we hope to have a really solid draft by the next year. So I think that is the quickest path forward and the most transparent and open path forward that we have right now to comprehensively address these issues.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, we're running a little bit behind here. Let's take our lunch break here. We're going to have a working lunch today so we can get to the West Oak Cliff Area Plan. It is 12:27. Let's take a 15-minute break, grab our lunches, and come right back. Okay, Commissioners, it is 12:45. We are back on the record. We'll continue with our zoning cases with case number 8Z212215, District 8, Ms. Algaer.
Mike, can I get sharing? Okay, this is case number 11, Z212215, an application for a specific use permit for a truck stop on property zoned an LI Logistics Industrial Subdistrict within Plan Development District number 761, the Dallas Logistics Port Special Purpose District, located on the southwest corner of Blanco Drive and Logistics Drive. Area of request is approximately 5.7 acres. Also located in District 8, across Bonnie View from 207. So the area of request site is currently, wow, there's a major lag here. I'm frozen. Mike, did you freeze me? No. Pardon me just a moment. I lost my connection apparently.
Commissioners that are online, this is Mike King. We're running some technical support. Can y'all see the presentation? Okay. All right. And it's up on our screens and y'all can see it.
I've lost
Jennifer's.
connection. Like it just cut me out of WebEx even. Can you give me sharing privileges again? Oh, you don't have me in the meeting right now? Let me try again. Okay, I think I'm back in. Mike, can you? Yeah. Okay, apologize for the delay. The area request is currently undeveloped, shown here at the corner of what is a not fully built out logistics drive and then a relocated Blanco Drive. There's a narrow strip of agricultural zoning that still goes through your screen right here, but predominantly this is 761, the LI subdistrict, running north-south to the east across Blanco Drive, BNSF Railway, and then a DW pipeline easement. And then there is a small area just off your screen that is still zoned agricultural and has an SUP 1489 for an electric substation. There is a little bit of, there's maybe 5 or 6 single family sites that are about 1,000 feet to the north of this up Blanco Road, but they're not anything that would be considered an adjacency for residential adjacency purposes. Baby. I'm frozen again. Frozen, I tell you, frozen. Just gonna stand up here and stare at my screen. There we go. So like I said, the area is currently zoned LI Logistics Industrial Subdistrict within the Planned Development District that was established in 2007. There is no conceptual development plan required for this particular PD, but an SUP is required for a truck stop use. Surrounding properties to the west and the west, northwest, southwest are already developed with warehouse uses. And then to the south and then across Blanco Drive to the east and then to the north are currently undeveloped. There's Whites Branch Creek running east-west just south of the request site. And as I mentioned, the railway is to the east across Blanco Drive. Kidding. Okay, so this is the proposed SUP site plan as it was shown in the case report. If you notice in the case report, though, a revised site plan was pending, and I did receive that from the applicant. That is shown here. For the most part, the changes that were made had to do with making sure that the call outs and some of the site features were going to be passable for zoning when it went over to the permitting phase of the project. So we're making a concerted effort to not have folks come here and then go to permitting to just get sent back here because a sidewalk is in the wrong place or there's a call out that's a little bit unclear. So Most of it was just cleaning up some things of that nature. But I will also say that they have, at the request of our arborist, they've added some call outs for the type of additional landscaping that's going to be provided on the site. So one of the conditions in the PD or proposed conditions in the SUP is that landscaping will comply with Article 761 and also with the additional landscaping or the landscaping in addition to Article 761 that's shown on this site plan. Hopefully you can see that a little bit better. I'll just call out a couple of things. So one of the issues potentially that would have maybe gotten them sent back at permitting, that the width of these drive aisles, typically the maximum width is 35 feet. The developer, I believe, is going to request from engineering, based on some turn studies that they do, to have a 40-foot wide aisle. It's not unheard of that happens, but we're not at the phase right now where we could guarantee that would be approved. So they added, rather than showing a 40-foot wide drive aisle, they showed it as 35 feet and then added a 5-foot potential width expansion to the plan, so that permitting is aware that it's already been looked at over here, and we are, if you are good with it and if council is good with it, that 5-foot additional width would be allowed. And then also there were some issues with setbacks. There's a 25-foot setback required around all property lines, and some of the equipment yard was potentially going to be encroaching into that on logistics. And then we had some equipment here in the back corner that was also potentially in that setback. So those adjustments have been made. And just a side-by-side, if I won't belabor this one, and then, I mean, I went real fancy and did an overlay. We can spend a lot of time on this really cool diagram that I created if you want, but otherwise I'll just move on. If you have any questions, certainly I'm happy to answer them. And then just some photos of the site. So this is the west side of the property from Logistics Drive. And then just going to work counterclockwise around the site. This is looking down Logistics. Again, the property is completely undeveloped. You can see in the photo here where the improvements in terms of the roadway improvements and then the sidewalk improvements kind of stop all of a sudden. And at permitting, I believe they'll be required to build out, at least in front of their property, the roadway and the sidewalk. This is from the northeast corner of the property, looking down what is the relocated Blanco Drive. This is also on the thoroughfare plan, but there's some discussion whether or not they'll need to build this road out or improve it further, and that'll all take place at permitting based on factors that I am not 100% aware of. But then just working way around the site, it's heavily treed, undeveloped, and then looking back up Blanco. Surrounding, this is just the creek to the south of the property. To the southwest, this is one of the warehouses that is developed to the southwest. Looking away from the site, we're almost at the City of Dallas limits here, just a little bit further to the south. And then undeveloped across Blanco Drive as well. This is back up at that northeast corner. As I said, if you continued north about 1,000 feet on Blanco, you would get to 5 or 6 single-family homes. And then looking back along Logistics towards what is Bonnie View at the other end. Undeveloped immediately across Logistics from the site, and then warehouse to the northwest and southwest. Proposed conditions, pretty much standard language, other than staff and the applicant did not come to an agreement on the period for approval. The applicant is requesting a 10-year approval with eligibility for automatic renewal for additional 10-year periods, and staff recommends 5-year renewal with 5-year automatic renewal periods. And then staff inserted some standard maintenance language into the SUP conditions. Would just like to call out condition number 4 here with respect to the landscaping. So the site plan that you're looking at seems pretty sparse in terms of landscaping, but just to point out that that is just the additional landscaping that is to be provided above and beyond what would be required in the PD ordinance itself. So you'll get that extra, and then it will also comply with the underlying zoning district. And as I said, staff is recommending approval for a 5-year period with eligibility for automatic renewal for additional 5-year periods, subject to the revised site plan that was just presented at briefing and staff's recommended conditions.
Thank you very much for the excellent briefing. Questions, commissioners? Commissioner Platt, please.
You know what? Thank you. This is your first time with that you and I worked together, and I so enjoyed it. And thank you for your diligence and your BI overview. With this particular case, the only thing that really is called out that is questioned is 10 and 10 opposed to 5 and 5. Would there ever be a condition, a recommendation of 10 and 10 for anything of this particular nature from a staff's perspective?
Not in the modern era. I mean, I've seen some that were decades ago that maybe would have gotten a recommendation like that, but it would not be typical for staff to recommend a 10 and 10 time period.
So is staff's recommendation of 5 of 5 a consideration of staff's a liberal recommendation opposed to a conservative recommendation?
I think that it's generous. I think for typically when you first would come in with a use of this type, truck stop or motor vehicle fueling station, something like this, I think the initial approval period would typically be less than 5 years. But there were a few considerations. One, this particular use is specifically meant to serve other uses that already exist in the area. So the point of this particular truck stop is a clean energy refueling station for vehicles that are associated with warehouse uses that already exist in the area. So it's coming in and serving a clean energy purpose that would immediately benefit the whole point of the special purpose district, which is the logistics and whatnot. So
this particular company, the Clean Energy, they are in existence already today in the city of Dallas. Is that not correct?
That is my understanding, yes.
If I remember correctly, I do believe there's one right there across the street from well, I don't want to say that, but the court, the criminal courts. Is that not correct?
I would have to.
Okay.
I would have to look into that.
But they are in existence already today, and this
Yes.
one is just a new location to better serve the logistics area that is designated for the city of Dallas. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Stanner.
Now, I just have a quick question. Are there fuel tanks going to be above ground or below ground? Do you know?
So the compressed the CNG compression tanks will be above ground. And those are permitted to, I would refer you to the staff report on this one for specific details, but the compression tanks will be above ground in the equipment yard that you saw towards the front at logistics. Everything else is below ground.
That does also have fuel in it.
I believe so, but
Okay, because my lead-up question to that, really what I was looking for, is there anything in this when you take undeveloped land and turn it into a truck stop under an SUP that says what you have to do if you abandon it in mitigating it back to being used as some other purpose?
not that I am aware of. I have no knowledge of that, actually. I would have to look into that.
Interesting. Okay.
In other words, if there's buried tanks, what do they,
Mm-hmm.
do they just leave them there for somebody else to move in?
Correct. And often in other cities, they put in, when they do truck stops and that sort of thing, they put in something in the language that says what you must do if you decide to abandon it as a truck stop. So there's no question about that at the end. So I was curious if there was any language in this that dealt with that.
There isn't in the SUP, proposed SUP language. I think probably the applicant will be able to better address that
Thank you.
question
I'll
this
do that.
afternoon. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
The applicant is here. Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, we'll keep moving. Commissioners, the subdivision docket consent agenda items, just as FYI, number 8 will come off consent due to conflict. Mr. Poole is out of pocket for the assigned cases, commissioners, but Ms. Mormon is here for light questions. Any questions on any of the signed cases? Any questions on those? Commissioner Hampton.
Ms. Mormon, one question on CA, let me read the number, 2203140003, the Canton property, 2425 Canton Street. Is it correct that the revised proposal that is included in the docket is for a revised sign type D at 13 feet and the removal of the type E sign?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioners, let the record reflect, Commissioner Young and Vice Chair Rubin have a conflict on item number 12. We'll step out very briefly. And they have stepped out of the chamber. Commissioners, any question on this item before we move on to OCAP? This has been briefed before. Any questions? Okay, no questions. Let the record reflect that Commissioner Young and Vice Chair Rubin will be stepping back in. In fact, they are. Commissioners, let's move on to our last item. It's the West Oak Cliff Area Plan. I see that Mr. Church is online. Good afternoon, sir. Just an FYI, we do have a hard stop at 1:45, Daniel, so if you could just keep that in mind. Good afternoon. We can't hear you, Daniel.
Now
we can. Thank you.
You can hear me? Perfect.
Yes, we can.
All right. Let me. All right. Good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you and give you an update on the West Oak Cliff Area Plan. My name is Daniel Church. I'm a planning supervisor in the Planning and Urban Design Department, and I've been the project manager on the West Oak Cliff Area Plan for the last 27 months. So today, I'm just gonna, I know that we're short on time, so I'm gonna do my best to kind of hit the highlights. I'll give some background as to why the plan has occurred. I'll talk about the engagement effort that we've done over the last 2 years. I'll briefly touch on the plan's goals and the framework and some of the recommendations. I'll talk about what the Comprehensive Land Use Committee, it's been briefed to that committee multiple times, and their influence on the plan and changes that we've made based on their input. Then I'll talk about next steps. So just to kind of wind back the clock to 2019, In 2019, the city changed the authorized hearing process. It used to be first come, first serve. Now it's based on scoring criteria. And one of the highest scoring criteria is having an adopted area plan. So this is an area of Dallas in the southwestern quadrant of the city. It's about a 5 square mile area bounded by Davis, Tyler and Vernon, Illinois, and Cockrell Hill. Before the change in the authorized hearing process, 5 separate authorized hearings had been filed by City Council and City Plan Commission. And so in order to advance those forward, Councilmember Chad West initiated the West Oak Cliff Area Plan, working with Planning and Urban Design to be the lead project coordinator for that planning effort. So as I mentioned, it is in the southwestern area of the city, about 5 square miles, roughly 44,000 residents, and 86% of those residents are Hispanic. So a little bit of why the plan is being done. As I mentioned, there are those 5 authorized hearings. Those are the areas that you see on the map in purple. Again, those were filed before the area plan process started. So it's critical that the area plan help inform and create the foundation through engagement to inform those authorized hearing processes. But beyond that, this is an area that we know is experiencing a lot of development pressure because of the growth and change that's occurred nearby in the Bishop Arts District. There's a lot of really beautiful, great neighborhoods in this area. There's 3 transit stations. And so we're already beginning to see development pressure move into the area. On top of that, there are those 3 DART stations where not only is there city policy to have development near transit and an articulated land use vision for all of our DART stations, we also know that these are areas that developers are interested in building in. So it's really important to have a community-driven vision for these areas, to have a land use vision that aligns with what the community wants to see there. And then maybe most importantly, this is an area of the city that's never had any sort of existing land use or vision guide. So the goals for this area plan, like all area plans, are to establish a future land use map, that land development vision, which will be incorporated into Forward Dallas. Also to, as I mentioned, have the visioning and the engagement that was conducted through this 2-year process inform those authorized hearings. Also to identify any street and park improvements that may be needed in the area so that those can be included in future capital improvement projects and future bonds. And also identify any other priorities related to land development that aren't captured in those first 3. And just briefly, I do want to touch on, this idea of a future land use map. A future land use map is not a zoning map. It doesn't change the zoning. It's not a mandate for development or redevelopment. And it doesn't change any of the property rights that exist on that property. That can only occur through the authorized hearing process. It's simply a guide for future decisions about zoning and infrastructure. And the place types that are described in the future land use map you'll see in a few slides are intended to help guide development over the next several decades. So throughout this process, the community has been at the center of the entire process. We've had 14 public meetings, both virtually and in person, and then 15 other meetings with the communities, whether it was meeting with neighborhood associations or other sort of workshops. We held 3 different surveys throughout the process. I should mention that all of our engagement was conducted bilingually to ensure that there was an equitable approach to engaging a community that we know is largely Hispanic, and at least 50% of the residents, English is not their primary language. Also, an important part of this process was the council member appointed task force. This had representatives from each of the neighborhood associations in West Oak Cliff, and also a few other representatives and property owners. That group met 16 times over the course of 26 months. And they were really instrumental in providing guidance and shaping the plan, whether it was how and where we were engaging, or ultimately what the draft recommendations looked like. City staff, including myself, we were responsible for facilitating the task force meetings, providing the task force with relevant information and data so that they could make effective decisions. We organized all of the community engagement. And then our role was also to synthesize everything that we heard from the community and turn those into the recommendations that ultimately are in the draft plan. And then the elected officials, so that would be Councilmember Chad West and Commissioner Popkin. The council member was responsible for appointing the task force and for initiating the process. And both the commissioner and the council member are assisting in the plan adoption process. So without going into all the names, you can just see here is the 16-member task force, and you've got the representatives from all of the neighborhood associations. It was chaired, the task force was chaired by former Planning Commissioner Mike Anglin. So over the course of the 2-year process, 2020, we really started by scoping and launching the plan. 2021 was very heavy on engagement. We started area-wide to get an idea of what the community wanted to see for the entire area. And then we drilled down as we identified some key focus areas to establish and craft a very detailed land use vision on. And then in 2022, we've been using that time to draft the plan and then have engage the community to ensure that what's in the draft plan aligns with what they want to see. Critical throughout this entire process has been community engagement. This is just a more detailed version of that schedule. So I do want to touch briefly on our engagement process. Overall, this is one of the more comprehensive and robust engagement efforts that the city's ever done from an area planning perspective. We've had almost 7,800 touch points, and we define a touch point as people who attended a meeting, surveys completed, people who interacted with our online website. And I just wanted to show this that to put in perspective, the 360 plan, which was adopted in 2017, had 1,500 touch points, and that's an area that's 30 square miles, so it's 6 times the size of West Oak Cliff. So very robust engagement. As I mentioned, all of our meetings were conducted bilingually, whether we had translators available or we had all of our materials that we were either on boards or passed out were available in both Spanish and English. We had nearly 1,000 people attend our meetings, and several thousand people interact with our online website. And that interactive website was through a tool called Social Pinpoint, which was really helpful, especially during the pandemic, because it allowed people to have an interactive map that they could add data and information onto and really helped inform the process, and is going to be a great tool just moving forward into the future for all area planning efforts. As soon as we were safely able to do so, we moved engagement in person, outdoors. I definitely think that helped to break down some barriers and allow for conversations to occur more naturally. It helped break down some of the language barriers that existed and establish some more trust. So these meetings occurred throughout 2021. When we released the draft plan to the public in March of this year, we had both an online and an in-person meeting where we just presented the information of what was in the draft plan and collected feedback. To supplement that, we also had 2 pop-up events at local Hispanic grocery stores, because we know that historically the Hispanic community has been difficult to engage on planning efforts. And so we really wanted to make a concerted effort to meet people where they are and help answer questions, pass out surveys, and just generally inform the community about the plan so that they could provide us more input. And on top of all of that, we also mailed out 8,000 bilingual postcards through DISD so that every kid went home with a postcard so that their families could learn more about the plan and either go online or go to the local rec center and get more information and give us their input. So overall, we had about 300 people complete that survey about the draft plan. 81% live in West Oak Cliff, 40% work in West Oak Cliff, and about 62% of the respondents are Hispanic. So I'll kind of blow through this quickly because I do know that we're short on time. We started with some planning goals that were crafted by our task force, things that they thought were the priorities. Using that as a starting point and through engaging the community, we were able to elicit the plan values and vision statement for the West Oak Cliff area plan. And then what we heard from the community, really everything began to fall into 4 main buckets, which was land use and development, inclusive community development and quality of life, parks and open space, and transportation and infrastructure. So I'm not going to read through these, but this is the vision statement and the values. And all of this can be found in the executive summary and in the draft document. So just touching briefly on those draft recommendations. For each of the 4 frameworks, we had a vision map that identified kind of a list of priority projects and things that the community had highlighted that they'd like to see. And in addition to that, we also identified 4 main objectives. Each framework section has an implementation matrix, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I'm not going to go through each of these objectives for the sake of time, and I'm happy to go back to those if there's questions. But the goal was really to identify the key objectives for each of these 4 topics. I will say on inclusive community development and quality of life, some of the main concerns definitely related to concerns about neighborhood affordability, displacement, and gentrification. That's something that was a huge part of the entire process and the plan, as well as concerns about preservation of existing businesses and supporting local businesses. For transportation and infrastructure, we have a framework for a bike network in the area, as well as other street improvements. All of those will then go to our transportation and public works departments to be implemented as projects. Many of the sidewalk projects that were identified score very well for the sidewalk master plan. So we're hopeful that many of those will begin construction in the coming years. And then lastly, here's the land use and development vision. This is that future land use map. And so you can see those 5 different place types that were identified in West Oak Cliff. And it's important that these 5 place types, the goal is for these 5 place types to align as closely as possible with the draft place types that are currently being written for Forward Dallas, so that this future land use map can just become a detailed component that fits into the future land use map for the entire city through Forward Dallas. I will highlight that the 4 main objectives for land use and development were to preserve and protect existing single-family neighborhoods, promote transit-oriented development, create walkable neighborhood-scale mixed-use centers, and preserve historic buildings and character. Through this process, we did also identify 7 focus areas. These aligned a great deal with the existing authorized hearings that I talked about, but we also captured some other areas that were near transit and some commercial corridors where we know that there is development pressure. So for each one, we kind of did different things. We either did some urban design diagrams and had some recommendations. We did some before and afters of what some improvements might look like in these areas. And for each one, we also had, just like with each framework, we had an implementation matrix. So this had an action item, a time frame for implementation, a lead agency and support agencies for implementation, and any sources of funding that might be needed. And the goal of this is really to have a measurable outcome, so we can report and be able to keep track of what's been accomplished, what hasn't, so that we can keep the community up to date as to how implementation is going after adoption. So here are those 5 authorized hearings that I mentioned earlier. They go back as far as November of 2017, with the most recent one being from September of 2019. So some of these areas have been waiting nearly 5 years to have their authorized hearing processed, and that's simply due to the fact that we're working to get this area plan complete. As soon as the area plan is adopted, those authorized hearings will be able to move forward. I do want to briefly touch on the fact that for the vast majority of West Oak Cliff, we're not recommending any sort of changes at all to zoning or land use. That's for 63% of the area. For 37% of the area, we're recommending some changes, but those changes are very minor. When you break that down, only 2% of that area is any sort of change that would be for commercial or mixture of use or mixed use. And those are all of the focus areas that I already talked about. These are areas that are already commercial corridors, but are currently zoned CR. And the idea is simply to allow for a greater mixture of uses, including some residential. Additionally, in terms of the residential areas where we're recommending any sort of changes, these are single family areas that we're recommending some additional missing middle housing types be considered through future authorized hearings. So that might be accessory dwelling units in certain areas, or accessory dwelling units and duplexes. That is the vast majority of the recommendations are for either only allowing ADUs or ADUs and duplexes. In terms of any other more intense use, which is triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage courts, we're only recommending those to occur on large lots in single family areas, and that's less than 2% of the total land area of West Oak Cliff. So it's a very small percentage of the overall area that we're recommending any sort of change. And as part of that, we're also recommending that they have strict design guidelines so that they fit into the neighborhood context seamlessly. As I did mention, this plan has gone to Comprehensive Land Use Committee 4 times over the course of the last couple months. A few weeks back, the club committee made a motion that was passed that essentially added some recommendations to be amended in the document. And the plan that you have, the most recent plan that was shared with this committee, does have those changes included. That includes removing references to autocentric businesses, some refinements and recommendations around missing middle housing, and also having a time frame in a framework for reevaluating the plan over time and sharing that information with the public, as well as with commissions and boards such as this one. Staff does have one additional recommendation that we'd like to recommend for amendment in the draft document. On page 122 in the Tyler Vernon Station area, this is an area where we are recommending some missing middle housing. While we did hear some support for that missing middle housing through engagement, there is still some opposition in that community. And so we wanted to amend the language specifically to address that. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read through each of these changes, but I will say that I'll kind of read the last few sentences because I think it's important. It is worth noting that while the area plan is recommending considerations for additional missing middle housing choices in this area, there is some expressed opposition by various community members towards this recommendation, as highlighted by surveying conducted by local community organizers. While their survey highlighted some support for additional housing choices, the majority of surveyed residents only support single-family homes and accessory dwelling units. So we just wanted to ensure that the language in the plan aligned with what the community's concerns were. So in terms of next steps, some of the key takeaways we had, as with all planning processes, establishing trust and building relationships was critical. This is an area that's never had any planning work done, and it's also an area that has seen other areas of the city detrimentally impacted by bad planning decisions. And so there was a lot of concern that this was just another example of the city coming in with the intent to redevelop and gentrify and push out. And so it was really critical to establish trust and communicate that that is not the intent. As a part of that, it was also really important to work with neighborhoods to build neighborhood capacity and create new neighborhood associations, which isn't just important for area planning, but also important for all city processes so that we can get the word out and have a better network on the ground to spread information. And then lastly, and most importantly, equity was critical throughout this process, whether it was translation of documents and having bilingual meetings or working with community groups to come up with creative, out of the box ways to get information out to the public. It was really important that equity and engaging the entire West Oak Cliff community was a part of this endeavor. We have begun to receive letters of support from local neighborhood associations. And staff's recommendation is for approval with suggested additional changes in addition to any requested comments of the shared draft of the West Oak Cliff area plan by this commission in order to advance the plan for review and adoption by City Council. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions in the time that remains.
Thank you very much, Mr. Church. Commissioners, let's take questions on the other side of the hearing. We'll go ahead and conclude our briefing now. It is 1:30 p.m. and that concludes the briefing of the Dallas City Plan Commission. Mr. King, let us know when we're ready to go for the hearing.
We're ready to go now.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Williams, can you please start us off with a roll call?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. District 1, District 2,
Present?
Present.
District 4,
Present.
District 5,
Present.
District 6, District 7, District 8,
Present.
District 9,
District 9 is present.
District 10,
Present.
District 11, District 12,
Present.
District 13,
Present.
District 14, District 15.
I'm here.
Thank you very much. We do have a quorum. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today is Thursday, July 21st, 2022, 1:31 p.m. Welcome to the Dallas City Plan Commission. A couple of quick announcements before we get started. Our speaker guidelines, each speaker will receive 3 minutes. Ms. Williams will keep time, and she will let you know when your time is up. On cases where we do have opposition, per our rules, the applicant will receive a 2-minute rebuttal. And then also our rules allow us to adjust the speaker time on a case-by-case basis, and that will happen today on 2 cases. On cases number Z167395, the Elm Thicket case, each speaker will receive 1 minute. And also on the West Oak Cliff area plan, each speaker will receive 1 minute. Also, I believe that there's some yellow cards right behind Ms. Pham there on a little table. Please, if you would, at some point, make sure you fill one of those out. We'd love to have a record of your visit with us here today. And with that, commissioners, we'll come back now to Mr. Church and questions for him. Commissioner Young.
Yes, I note that at several points in the document, you refer to incorporation of an appropriate residential proximity slope. What is an appropriate residential proximity slope?
Yeah, so excellent question. That will be determined through those authorized hearing processes. In terms of what the specific ratio is, the starting point would be the current RPS slope, which is 1/3. If through the authorized hearing process and through engagement and notification out to all property owners, it's determined to be something different, then the zoning will reflect that, or the recommendation for the authorized hearing would reflect that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Housewright.
Mr. Church, in your slides a moment ago, there was a slide noting support from homeowner associations. I believe there were 6 listed on the slide. In the full-length report, the 89-page report available to us, when you get to the very end, I count 3 letters of support from homeowners associations. I don't know if those overlap with the 6 on your slide or if they're different, but my question is, how many homeowners associations do you estimate are present inside of this plan?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So there's no HOAs, but there are 11 neighborhood associations. So of the 3 that are in the document that was shared with you, we've received 3 letters in the last few days, and so the document online just hasn't been updated to reflect that. And I'm happy to share those letters with this commission as requested. And I'll also we'll make updates to the document online. So of the 6 that have submitted letters of support, that's 6 of the 11. It is also worth noting that some of those neighborhood associations are more organized than others, but we've been in communications with all of the neighborhood associations, and we had a representative from each neighborhood association on the task force throughout the process.
Mr. Church, do you know if any of those neighborhood associations or representatives will be present today?
I know that Commissioner Anglin is signed up to speak as chair of the task force. And I also know that Elena Stevens, who represented the Elmwood Neighborhood Association, I believe that she is signed up to speak as well. I'm not sure if there's any other representatives from the task force. I'd have to check the list of speakers.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes, Mr. Church, one of those
neighborhood associations is listed on your slide of being in support, sent a letter basically retracting the support that I know was sent to me, and I distributed it this morning, that expressing some serious reservations about the staff recommendation for the missing middle housing. You may not be aware of that, but yes, if we could get copies of all of those letters of support, I would like to get those.
Absolutely, yeah, we're happy to provide those.
Commissioner Standard. Oh, no, I thought I saw you reaching in it. Commissioner Anderson, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How many business associations were conferred with during the making of this area plan?
So there's not we've been working with the Automotive Association of West Oak Cliff in the last few months, in the recent weeks, to ensure that the recommendations in the Hampton Clarendon area and the downtown Elmwood area are those that they can support. That said, through our engagement effort, we did not find any well-established business associations in West Oak Cliff. And actually, one of our recommendations in the area plan is to create a business task force for the businesses in West Oak Cliff so that they can have kind of a more cohesive, organized approach and have a group that can effectively network and engage with the chambers of commerces and engage with the city so that they can better set themselves up for the future.
Is it appropriate to think that they should be involved in the ratification of an area plan as opposed to being on the opposite end after it were to pass or be presented?
So yes, I mean, our job is to balance the community's input and as well as property owners. Anything that would be recommended in terms of changes of zoning through the authorized hearing would obviously notify those business owners. In terms of notifying out to every individual property owner or getting in touch with every business, that was something that we just didn't have the budget or capacity to undertake because there's thousands of commercial properties in this area and many of them are out-of-state owners. At the same time, we worked with on the ground neighborhood association and other individuals to help spread the word, not only to residents, but also to business owners in the area.
I think there are more
Commissioner, can you please speak into your microphone so we can capture your questions? Thank you.
Yes. Would you say there are more residences in the area than businesses? And I'm only saying that because I think that the automotive businesses were kind of called out in the area plan, and I'm looking for if there was engagement on businesses overall in order to see where they might want it to stand in the area plan.
So there are substantially more residences than businesses. This is an area that has about 44,000 residents and only about 3,500 jobs. Over 80% of the land area of West Oak Cliff is residential. So the vast majority of West Oak Cliff is not commercial. That said, the recommendations that initially had been in the draft that was released in March that speak to auto-centric businesses, those have been removed at the request of the club committee. At the same time, we have been engaging as needed with businesses in the area and property owners of those commercial properties. But the most important part of our engagement has been with those neighborhoods since they do make up over 80% of the West Oak Cliff area.
I think there's opportunity, and being a question, there's opportunity at creating or listening to the businesses and what they might want as a part of this overall business plan. I mean, I know there are thousands of residences and there are hundreds of businesses, so that seems like that would be something that we could kind of get our hands around. My next question, and I'll pose it as one question: education, institutions, and transit for DART. How robust was your conversations with those two?
Yeah, so we had multiple meetings with DISD and we worked with the trustee actually to help us get the engagement out through the students in the local schools. So we did work with DISD because we also know it's important, not just through this area plan, but from Forward Dallas as well, that if we're talking about increasing density anywhere in the city, it's important to be thinking of what are the impacts on the school system? How is that going to change the number of classrooms that might be needed in an area? So we had those conversations and we'll continue to have those conversations with DISD moving forward. In terms of working with DART, we had multiple ongoing meetings with both their bus network team as well as with their real estate and capital improvements team, because during this process, that's when DART changed their bus route system. And so it was really important to ensure that the changes to the network would be reflective in our plan, and that if they were doing anything that might potentially change land use impacts, we wanted to capture that. At the same time, there's also recommendations for development at the Hampton DART station because there's a large parking lot there that largely sits unused. And so DART has expressed interest and is working with the city to release an RFP for a public-private partnership for development there. And so we had ongoing work with DART on that and continue to have a strong relationship with them in the West Oak Cliff area as well as other areas of the city.
Thank you. It'd be good to see the evidence of those conversations so that we could kind of discern what direction or what concerns they had relative to what you guys are presenting in the plan. And also, lastly, you mentioned that the area is mostly residential with only a certain number of businesses. And my thoughts are that the area plan is an opportunity to evaluate just that and determine what the proper balance is and be able to make recommendations to that end. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for entertaining my questions, and thank you, Mr. Staff, for also entertaining the questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Blair.
In your presentation, you showed that there was a percentage of ADUs that was being recommended. Is that that would be in single family, existing single family uses, correct?
Yes, that is correct. The recommendation was in areas within a quarter mile of the Jefferson bus line, which is the busiest bus line in the entire network, as well as within a half mile of the Hampton DART station and the Tyler Vernon DART station, in single family residentially zoned properties, which are R5 and R75, to permit accessory dwelling units by right. But that would require that to occur through some sort of future authorized hearing or zoning change.
So, and I think that's where I think you were thinking about where I'm going, because isn't in our zoning standards for single family ADUs aren't permitted? Is that not correct?
They're permitted through Board of Adjustment action. And so one of our recommendations actually is it's either to create a new infill residential zoning category, since we know that this is something that will need to be an issue addressed citywide. There's also neighborhoods in these areas that have expressed interest in creating a conservation district. And so permitting those additional housing types can be done through the conservation district process or some sort of a zoning overlay. Either way, we know it's going to require some sort of a code amendment to make that occur.
So how would you protect the communities that do not have this advantage or this opportunity to not see systematic use of this process to mitigate the zoning standards in other areas of the city?
You know, our area plan only focuses specifically on West Oak Cliff, and we do know that some of the recommendations that are outlined in the area plan might be topics that Forward Dallas aims to address as well. And so I think that some of the citywide issues are best handled or will be best handled by Forward Dallas. In terms of areas that are outside of these areas within West Oak Cliff specifically, we don't make any specific recommendations against permitting accessory dwelling units by right, or for permitting accessory dwelling units by right or any other residential choice housing type. a property owner, like any other area of the city, could still go through the Board of Adjustment process if they wanted to do that. And if a neighborhood in the future is interested in seeking some sort of a change to the zoning to have ADUs be permitted, then they could do that. But that's not something that we heard through this process, and so we didn't include that in the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes, my question is about the page in your presentation that said that believe it was 67% of the single-family neighborhoods would not be affected by your recommendations for more density. 33% would, but the effect would be minor. My question is about, could you please evaluate the potential for destabilizing a single-family neighborhood through fundamentally altering the pattern of the neighborhood? Because it seems to me that if you change the zoning to the point that, you can introduce these different types of density, then, you would have a potential for future platting cases and seeing that, 8.503 would no longer apply because there isn't a pattern because you fundamentally altered it. So how would that be a minor effect?
So the platting portion is something that we know that the specifics are definitely important to determine through that future code amendment and or that future authorized hearing to consider changing the zoning in these areas. The area plan is purely a starting point for that conversation to say that considering some additional density near transit is something that the city as a policy has adopted council policies to achieve. There's also interest in the community to consider that. And additionally, we know that by having a diversity of housing choice options, it also helps to have a diversity of housing price options. And this is an area where we know affordability is a concern. So having some more affordable product type is going to be really important. In terms of preserving the character or ensuring that it doesn't fundamentally alter the neighborhood, the document has multiple pages in it that speak to what a potential missing middle overlay or some recommendations might look like in terms of ensuring that the form and massing and height of any of these structures is identical to what currently exists in the R75 zoning. And so the goal is we know that today somebody could come in, tear down one of these small homes and build a very massive 40% lot coverage house by right, but it can only have one kitchen. And so what we're saying is we can strategically, through a potential future zoning change, consider, thinking about ways that we ensure that any new development is fits contextually in terms of height and massing, but also maybe is allowed to have more than one unit in it, those being smaller units. A duplex that instead of a 2,500 square foot house, it could be two 1,200 square foot units. That begins to allow for some diversity of price points in a neighborhood that we know desperately needs it.
I understand that, but as far as fundamentally altering the lot patterns, the recommendation in the report is that, lots of a certain size, say 6,000 square feet, could be subdivided into two 3,000 square foot lots with, 30-foot widths. And then it goes the other way, that lots of a certain size bigger could be automatically, fourplexes, cottage homes, something like that. What are you envisioning in an overlay that would allow that sort of either subdivision or aggregation that would not fundamentally alter the pattern of a single-family neighborhood when confronted with, future platting requests to either go smaller or bigger?
So, one of the main items are around the Tyler Vernon Station area. It's a very unique development pattern. There are some areas like Elmwood, which has a bunch of 7,500 square foot lots that have a very regular block pattern. But then there's other areas that are either previously aggregated over time and replatted, or they were just always large, because we have some lots that are within a block or two of the DART station that are over 2 acres in size. And those are the lots that we specifically know there's opportunities on long-term to think about some additional housing types to be allowed there. We wouldn't want to preclude the ability for that lot to be, if a 2-acre lot wants to be subdivided so that they can have a series of quadplexes that architecturally fit into the neighborhood, that's something that aligns with city policy. At the same time, in areas that have existing, an existing fabric of R75 zoning, the vast majority of those, we're not even recommending any changes to be considered there, except for allowing duplexes to be considered. And as part of that, our recommendation is that we have strict architectural guidelines so that we don't get the duplexes that have 2 garages and 2 driveways out front, but instead are ones that contextually fit into the neighborhood and feel like single-family homes. In terms of, what 8.503 could do, that's something that really has to be determined through the zoning process and through that code amendment. And it's not something that the area plan can specifically outline because it's too early. This is a starting point for a vision. It's not the details of the code.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Rubin.
Yes, thank you. I think Commissioner Carpenter brings up a good point about the intersection between plating and zoning. And even though that's not the issue being directly addressed in the area plan, it's several chess moves down the board, or even another chess game where we're eventually going to have to confront that. So you're looking at me, Ms. Pham, so you might be the one to address this. But let's just assume that we have a area that is R75 and every lot in the area is actually 7,500 square feet. But then some sort of infill zoning category comes along and that area is rezoned, and that zoning category does allow smaller lots. Would that mere change of zoning category in and of itself change the 8.503 analysis, or is it actually the change? Would it have to be changes in lot sizes themselves to alter our 8.503?
That's a very interesting question, and I will need some time to research that and get back with you at a later date.
That would be great. I know it's something some of us has thrown around and are really just trying to figure out what that impact would be.
Commissioner Young.
Yes, I want to drill down on the word consider. Repeatedly through the plan, the land use and development recommendations say, consider this, consider that. Are those just a list of topics for discussion when each individual authorized hearing comes up? Or does the plan recommend not only consideration but adoption?
So the plan only recommends consideration. We know whether it's City Plan Commission or City Council, it will require one of those two bodies to authorize a hearing for a geography to move forward. And the recommendations that are outlined in the area plan would serve as the starting point for when city staff processes that authorized hearing. They would come to the public and say, the area plan said this, so this is what that would look like in terms of a zoning change, and then have public engagement to ensure, is that accurate? Is that not at all what the community wants to see? Maybe opinions have changed. Adoption it doesn't recommend adoption of those. It's only consideration. And it would be to this body and to City Council to ultimately recommend adoption.
Well, but I hear you saying some conflicting things. It's not just, here are a list of things to talk about. We're totally neutral on what happens. Now let's talk about them. What you're telling me is it's a list of things to talk about, and there's sort of a thumb on the scales in the sense of we start with a baseline of what is suggested in the area plan. Is that accurate? And obviously what the commission and council do is the ultimate final word. But you indicated that staff would start with what the area plan recommends. Is that right?
That is correct.
So you are recommending, for example, that within a half mile of the DART stations, missing middle housing be permitted?
That is correct. That aligns with city policy, and then it also aligns with what a lot of voices in the community told us.
Well, and we'll see the extent to which that is true or not. Shifting to the cottage homes, do I understand correctly, if an area, let's say, typically has a half acre, is zoned R5 or R75, but the lots are typically a half acre, that would permit 8 dwelling units per single family lot?
Yes, that's correct. That's what we have outlined in the area plan as kind of a guide for a future zoning change.
That is more dense than TH3, is that right?
I'd have to go check the code, but
Well, take my word for it, it's 12 dwelling units an acre. And it's almost as much as cluster housing, which is 18, is that right?
again, I'd have to check the code to know the exact dwelling units, but I'd take you at your word.
All right. Now, turning to the narrow lot single family, I notice your report indicates that the narrow lot single family houses would be either on the same lot or on skinny lots. If it were the same lot, then it would be correct, would it not be, that that is not what is defined as single family housing in the development code?
That is correct. The idea
That
is
would in
essentially to
fact
have
be in effect a detached duplex.
that is correct.
Okay. And if it were on separate lots, that would require replatting and compliance with 8.503 would be required.
Yeah, that's my understanding. That's correct.
Okay. Last question about accessory dwelling units. That issue, of course, is before ZOAC, which may recommend no change to current regulations or may recommend a radical change or something halfway in between. Is there the potential for your land use study recommending something that is inconsistent with what ZOAC ultimately recommends and the Commission and Council ultimately adopt for accessory dwelling units?
It is possible. Our goal has been to ensure that the plan aligns with whether it's parking recommendations or some of these other recommendations around accessory dwelling units, that we're working with those other planners who are processing those to make sure that they're as in great of alignment as possible. And hopefully Forward Dallas will kind of be the master document that will speak to all of this. But depending on timing, it is possible that ours could recommend what's in there today, and then ZOAC and CPC and council could recommend something different. That is possible.
And even perhaps ZOAC recommends something different.
Correct.
Okay. And are you suggesting that Forward Dallas amendments are going to address the issue of accessory dwelling units?
Yeah, there's a lot of topics that Forward Dallas aims to address, and I think that it's too early to know what the content is going to be in Forward Dallas, but we know that it's one of many topics that are potentially going to be included in that plan.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Blair.
Is it my understanding, I hear a lot of Forward Dallas making new recommendations, ADUs being determined to be applicable in this area plan, and some of the other things. Is it the intent to, in this particular area plan, to bypass the processes that are in place today to ensure that the entire city is operating within the standards of zoning that we understand in 51A by using the area plan process to make new zoning definitions, new lot coverage, new opportunities for additional housing stock, based on whatever definition you determine in this particular area plan, opposed to coming through the appropriate process of coming through ZOAC for ZOAC to recommend, coming through this particular body for the body to agree or disagree, and then going to city council before new zoning stock and new zoning definitions are codified into an ordinance?
The goal is not to subvert that or go around that. This is purely to capture the vision of a community into a document that serves as a starting point. And then any sort of amendments to code or zoning changes through an authorized hearing would have to go through all of the formalized processes that they already would. And it might be recommended that none of the recommendations that are in the area plan make sense, or some of them make sense and some of them don't. And that's for ZOAC and CPC and council to decide. This is purely to capture the vision that a community has for land use moving the next 20 or 30 years into the future.
But are you not actually trying to make those recommendations based on the fact, talking about ADUs? ADUs have specific rules, talking about having replats that are going to be difficult to do a replat if you have one unit and you have two units on one plat, and now you want to replat it and it has to go through a building. So isn't that essentially what this recommendation is doing, is altering the process through the area plan process?
You know, I again, it's just a starting point to just outline what long-term development looks like. It's the same processes would have to be followed. It's a recommendation, and maybe the recommendation, I mean, it can be seen as consideration to reimagine our parts of our code. But again, those would still have to go through all of the same formal channels that exist today.
Vice Chair Rubin.
Just a couple follow-up questions. First off, it's been a while since I've dug into the ADU regulations that are currently on code. I sat through some of those ZOAC meetings probably at the beginning of the pandemic. You've mentioned the Board of Adjustment process for allowing ADUs right now. Are there additional ways to get ADUs into an area, right, through conservation districts or PDs? That's another way to adopt ADUs at the moment for an area, correct?
That is correct. There are other ways. You know, conservation districts are definitely a tool. I've never seen a PD do that, but it certainly could.
Okay. Great. And just one sort of process question about Forward Dallas and area plans. What is the relationship between the upcoming Forward Dallas rewrite and area plans like WOCAP and others that are in the process? Does one trump the other? Are they somehow, do they interface? Can you just walk through that relationship?
Sure, I'll take a stab, and I'll let my assistant director Andrea hop on and add as well. You know, the idea is that the future land use map that I showed on one of those slides, that will essentially plug into the future land use map for the entire city like a puzzle piece, and that the recommendations that are outlined in West Oak Cliff will align and jive with Forward Dallas, and that one does not trump the other. The West Oak Cliff area plan will have a more detailed vision for the area that maybe not every area of the city is going to have because they don't have a current area plan. But it's simply a supplement to, not any sort of contradiction or contrary to. I hope that makes sense.
Do you have anything to add, Ms. Gillis?
Sure. And so this is a little unique because we have the area plan happening first, and then the comprehensive plan will come after that. Any subsequent plan that, so say we have Forward Dallas in place, any plan that comes after that will then be an amendment to the city's comprehensive plan. So we will make sure if there are any changes that area plan or neighborhood plan that would recommend, it would be agreed upon through that process. And then once adopted, it becomes an amendment and updating of the comprehensive plan.
Great. And Mr. Church mentioned a future land use map, which may or may ultimately not make it into the final Forward Dallas document. Assuming it does that future land use map dictate zoning, or is that just one thing to consider as rezoning is happening?
Exactly. It's a guide for zoning. It does not dictate absolute, because within land use, there's a range of options that you can usually look at for zoning classifications. So it doesn't dictate a one for one, but it is one of the guides, a strong guide that is used for looking at zoning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Church and Ms. Gillis.
Commissioner Hampton.
Thank you. I share many of the comments and questions that were asked by my fellow commissioners, so I won't repeat all of those. I think there's a lot here to digest. I will tell you, as I was trying to read it, the first thing that occurred to me is how fantastic it would be if we could have a bus tour of this area. I hope that's something that we might consider as we look to take action on this in the future. And I simply wanted to observe for Mr. Church that you might look at the Cedars as an example of a PD that included accessory dwelling units within it. So I think, and we likely have others, but I do know that is one recent one where we were able to include that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ms. Gillis, and Mr. Church.
Thank you, Commissioner Hampton. And yes, a bus tour is in the works. So we hope to have that at our next meeting or our second in August. Commissioner Popkin.
Just a couple follow-up questions on the conversation we've been having. Mr. Church, I know there's been a lot of conversation about large lots. Did a size limitation make it into the final draft? I'm still reading the complete draft.
There is not a recommendation currently in the plan for a maximum lot size or lot dimensions.
Okay. Let's continue that conversation, because I definitely want to keep talking with you about that. I think that's one of the greatest concerns, is if we've got some missing middle qualified as MF2, that it could turn into larger garden style apartments. Also, was there any conversation with the community about ADUs throughout the district, or was it primarily limited to around the stations? I know there are a lot of ADUs in this historic neighborhood already.
There are some existing accessory dwelling units, and we mostly while we started area wide, whenever we drilled down into the station areas specifically, we didn't have conversations about accessory dwelling units for the entire area. We did hear a small handful of individuals who definitely expressed interest in saying, why not ADUs for the entire area? Obviously that would require consideration for changing all of the zoning in all of West Oak Cliff. But if that's something that is, there's interest in, then it obviously could be included in the plan, but it was not something that we engaged the entire West Oak Cliff area about.
Okay, so simply just because of the size and nature of the plan, it's really 5 square miles. That'd be a different type of zoning change to really cover the full area with ADUs. Okay. And lastly, I recognize that this is a huge plan. I want to make sure I give commissioners plenty of time to review all the details. You guys have been working on this for 2 years. We've had some really in-depth conversations the last 6 months at least, tightening up some of these details with different community groups. And I encouraged community members to continue signing up to speak at our August 4th meeting, and I don't plan to make a motion until the 18th. Hopefully we can get a bus tour before then. I know today's docket is especially long, and so I encouraged community members to show up and speak at these later meetings rather than feeling like they need to stick around until all hours of the night tonight. But what are your next steps, Mr. Church, in engaging especially the Elmwood community? I know they're actively bringing in more members into their HOA as we speak. Is engagement continuing on this plan right now?
It is, so ultimately the draft in its current form, staff is not making any additional changes to the document. It's really to City Plan Commission and City Council to recommend those changes. The only additional changes that we would be making would be adding in those letters of support that have come in but have not found their way into the document yet. As requested, we're continuing to meet with neighborhood associations and anybody who requests a meeting. So we're more than happy to have those ongoing conversations, to hear everybody's voice and ensure that everybody is comfortable with the plan.
Great, and I just want to reassure everyone, I want to make sure we've got plenty of time for community members to read this final document. And I encourage community members listening to reach out to me and make sure that we've got any final changes necessary to make this really reflective of the neighbors' vision into the document before we get it to council. So I anticipate we'll be speaking more about the plan in the following 2 meetings, and I look forward to more questions from commissioners and the community. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really quickly, just kind of generally.
Commissioner Anderson.
I'm sorry. Thank you. In the future, on our subsequent meetings, could you outline where we're meeting certain sustainable communities, guidelines, and initiatives, and or what touch points they may have towards those kinds of initiatives? And then also, are there areas, and not to be answered right now, that can be improved in this area plan process so that we're more efficient for the other area plans that are to come? Thank you.
Yeah, on the first item, yes, I think that the main thing that we can do is highlight where recommendations that are in the plan align with other adopted city policies, such as our climate action plan, because I think that the climate action plan is a really great plan that guides, not only is guiding some of the recommendations that are in West Oak Cliff, as well as other areas of the city. In terms of process for area plans moving forward, one thing that occurred during this planning process was we started in May of 2020 in the height of the pandemic. And I know that future area plans hopefully will not have those same kinds of challenges. And we definitely had to navigate some difficult situations from an engagement perspective. But in terms of coming up with a more streamlined approach, I definitely think that this process, we learned some lessons, and I know that those processes and approaches will be incorporated, and PUD will take those into consideration into our future area plans so that we can shave off some time and that these processes don't take quite so long.
Thank you. Any other questions, commissioners?